You've been told you're not enough, that you need to fix yourself, improve, heal, change. But what if that was never true? What if the part of you that's been searching, striving, trying so hard to become someone was already whole from the beginning? Why then do you still feel like something's missing? Why do you lie awake at night wondering if you're broken, if you'll ever feel truly at peace? Why do you carry shame, guilt, regret, like scars you can't wash off? The truth is, you've been looking in the wrong place. Peace isn't found in perfection. Freedom doesn't come from changing who you are. And healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering the self you abandoned, the self that was never broken to begin with. Buddhism holds the key. For thousands of years, teachers across mountains and centuries whispered the same truth. You are already enough. You don't need to chase enlightenment. You don't need to earn love. Beneath all your noise, beneath your fear, your self-doubt, your mistakes, there is a stillness, a purity, a wholeness. Tonight, as you listen to these teachings, something will shift. The pressure to be more will melt. The noise in your head will soften. And what's left is silence. The kind that heals. The kind that feels like coming home. You'll wake up lighter, not because life suddenly got easier, but because you'll stop fighting yourself. This isn't just something to fall asleep to. This is something to wake up from, ready to remember who you truly are. Let's begin. Before we begin, take a deep breath, not to calm down, but to feel. Feel the body you've been ignoring, the one you keep trying to improve, escape, or perfect. Feel the thoughts you've tried to outrun, the ones that keep returning when the room is dark and still. Feel what it's like to just be here. For once, not chasing, not fixing, not pretending. Because what you're about to hear is not a solution. It's a return to what was never broken, never missing, never far away. And it starts now. The path you've been walking hasn't been wrong. It's just been incomplete. All the books, the late-night journaling, the quotes you saved and never looked at again, they weren't wasted. They were maps. But what if the place they were leading you to was already underneath your feet? That's the mystery the Avatamsaka Sutra quietly reveals. Not through rules or riddles, through a presence that can't be taught, only noticed. At the heart of this massive, shimmering Buddhist scripture lies a truth that almost feels like a trick. You are already what you seek, not metaphorically, not someday, right now, without needing to reach any spiritual milestone. The sutra never yells this. It doesn't demand you believe it. It simply shows a universe so deeply interconnected, so perfectly alive, that everything in it, yes, even your chaos, is already part of the awakening. But how could that be? How could someone so full of doubt, regret, insecurity and confusion possibly already be whole? Because what you are is not what your thoughts say. It's not what your past tells. It's not what your emotions scream in the middle of a hard day. Beneath every identity is the clarity of mind, untouched by time. And the Avatamsaka Sutra calls this clarity perfect illumination. This isn't a glow you have to earn. It's not something awarded for being kind enough, wise enough, or disciplined enough. It's not a trophy for becoming a better version of yourself. This light was always on. You just couldn't see it through the fog. In this sutra, the Buddha doesn't act like a hero or a gatekeeper. He's more like a mirror. He reflects what was already there in every sentient being, a deep brilliance hidden beneath the dust of habits, fear, and forgetfulness. He doesn't grant enlightenment. He reveals it by pointing again and again to what's already present. The reason this teaching feels so hard to accept isn't because it's unclear. It's because we've been conditioned to doubt ourselves, conditioned to believe that worth is something you win, not something you carry, conditioned to measure value by effort and peace by productivity. But if you were already complete, if nothing needed to be added to you, where would that leave your constant striving? What happens to the self who needs goals, who depends on becoming better just to feel okay? It crumbles. And in that crumbling, something terrifying and beautiful takes its place. Silence. Not the silence of giving up. The silence of no longer needing to perform. No longer needing to seek approval. No longer trying to reach a place you've never actually left. The Flower Garland Sutra, as it's sometimes called, uses the vastest metaphors to point to the most intimate truth. It speaks of galaxies and realms, of infinite Buddhas and countless worlds, not to overwhelm, but to wake you up to the scale of what's inside you. In this vision, everything is interdependent. There are no separate things. A single atom contains every Buddha's light. A moment of breath holds eternity. And what that means, if you're willing to hear it, is that nothing in your life has ever been wasted, not even the parts that hurt. Wholeness doesn't mean your life went the way you wanted. It means that what you are is not reduced by what you've lived through. The perfection the sutra speaks of isn't the kind that excludes suffering. It's a perfection that includes it, that holds your darkest days and says, even this belongs. Even this is part of the illumination. Even this pain is part of the fabric of awakening. And this isn't an excuse for passivity. It's not saying stop growing or never try again. It's pointing to the source of growth. Not lack, but love. Not pressure, but presence. When you start from wholeness, everything you do becomes an expression, not a compensation. The mind trained to see itself as flawed will always look for what's missing. But the mind that slows down, even for a moment, begins to notice something more subtle. There's no missing piece. There's just forgotten peace. In many stories within the sutra, the Buddha doesn't give his followers a new philosophy. He gives them vision. Suddenly, they see the entire cosmos as a reflection of their mind. They see trees glowing with Buddha nature. They see every being as a teacher, not because something changed outside, but because something shifted inside. That shift isn't loud, it's not dramatic. It's more like remembering something you knew as a child, but buried under adulthood. Like waking from a dream and realizing your hands were never tied. Most of the time, we don't notice our own clarity because we're too busy fixing shadows. We try to rearrange pain, reframe failure, redesign ourselves into something we hope will finally be lovable. But the sutra reminds us the light isn't after the shadow. It's the very reason you can see it at all. This changes everything. It changes how you treat your thoughts. You don't have to win over them anymore. You don't have to drown in shame every time your mind spins or storms. You simply remember, this storm is not the sky. It changes how you treat your past. You stop dragging it forward like a chain. You stop trying to rewrite it or use it as proof that you're too damaged to be whole. The past is a ripple in the ocean, not a separate sea. It even changes how you treat awakening itself. You stop asking, how long will it take, and start asking, what part of me is already free? Because something in you is, right now, even if you don't feel it, and the more you sit with that, the more it reveals itself. This is what Zen later called the sudden path, the realization that awakening doesn't take time. It takes seeing, and the seeing happens in stillness, not in climbing some spiritual ladder, not in perfecting meditation, in the moment you stop running from yourself. One teaching in the sutra says that a single dust mote contains infinite worlds. Let that settle into your nervous system. What you've been calling small might be infinite. What you've ignored in yourself, your quiet, your presence, your breath, might be sacred. You don't need to amplify your light. You just need to stop covering it. When you stop believing in the lie that you're broken, a strange quietness enters, and at first it might feel like loss, because the self that existed only in trying to get somewhere fades. But then something else arrives. Peace. The kind that isn't loud or proud. The kind that just sits beside you like an old friend who never left. Wholeness doesn't announce itself. It doesn't throw fireworks or give speeches. It just waits, patiently, while you look everywhere but inward. And when you finally look, really look, it doesn't scold you for being late. It says, "Welcome back." This is why, in the sutra, the entire universe bows to each being, not out of pity, but out of recognition. The same sacredness in the Buddha is in the child who doesn't know how to sit still, in the mother with regrets, in the old man afraid of dying. No one is disqualified, not by pain, not by mistakes, not even by doubt, because illumination isn't something that leaves. It just gets covered. And your job now isn't to earn it back, it's to remove what hides it. You've been running a race that has no finish line. You've been trying to find peace like it's a lost object, when in truth it's been resting inside the very one who's searching. There is no out there to get to. The most profound arrival is here. That's what the Avatamsaka Sutra means when it says the path and the goal are not two. They're one. Your journey is not toward wholeness. It's a spiral returning to what's always been. So tonight, let that land. Let the fear that you're not enough dissolve. Let the exhaustion of becoming fall away. Let the quiet part of you, the one that's watched your whole life without judgment, step forward. Let it hold you, speak through you, live through you. Because that part of you, the one that never rushed, never screamed, never doubted, it's real. It's not an idea. It's the ground under your feet, the breath in your lungs, the stillness behind every thought. And now that you've remembered, you can rest, not as someone who's getting there, but as someone who's already home. But what happens when wholeness feels impossible to believe? When someone's past is heavy, their actions unforgivable, their reputation stained? The last lesson opened the door to remembering our own illumination. But now, something deeper calls us, to ask if that same light could really exist in those the world has rejected. Could it still shine in the angry, the addicted, the violent, the forgotten? Could someone who's hurt others still be whole underneath? Not theoretically, not as a poetic metaphor, but truly down to the root of their being. It's easy to speak of wholeness when we feel close to peace. It's much harder when faced with stories that make us flinch, when history, culture, and our own instincts label certain people as irredeemable. But this is where Buddhist wisdom doesn't flinch. This is where it becomes fierce, not through punishment, but through radical compassion. Buddhist texts across traditions hold a quietly revolutionary claim that every being, no matter how lost or twisted their path, contains Buddha nature. This nature isn't earned. It's not awarded after a moral transformation. It doesn't wait for purity. It is already present, buried beneath karma, trauma, and layers of confusion. Even the vilest person, says the Mahayana tradition, holds the same seed of awakening as a fully enlightened being. The difference isn't in essence, it's in recognition. There are stories in ancient sutras of murderers who awakened, of prostitutes who became teachers, of tyrants who turned into monks. These weren't tales told to shock. They were lessons, meant to remind us that the Dharma doesn't close its door to anyone, not even the ones we've already shut out. The Angulimala Sutta, for instance, tells of a man who killed hundreds, wearing their fingers around his neck like a grim necklace. Yet after a single encounter with the Buddha, something broke open inside him. He renounced violence. He became a monk. He lived peacefully until death. The Buddha never asked him to erase his past, only to turn toward what he had forgotten. That story isn't about justification. It's about capacity. If someone that far gone could uncover their true nature, what does that say about the rest of us? In the Lotus Sutra, a similar message echoes through parables. Even those who've committed grave offenses can uncover their awakening if they hear the Dharma with a sincere heart. This isn't idealistic. It's uncompromisingly honest about one thing: no one is beyond return. And this doesn't only apply to those labeled evil. It includes anyone who's internalized shame so deeply they no longer believe they deserve to heal. People with addiction, people who've been imprisoned, people carrying unbearable secrets. The Dharma sees them, not as broken, but as asleep to their deeper nature. Buddha nature is not goodness in the moral sense. It's not about behavior. It's the clear awareness beneath all behavior, the open field that can't be burned, stained, or destroyed. When we speak of someone being enlightened in nature, we're not ignoring their actions. We're pointing to what existed before the wound. Because most people who harm others have first been harmed, not as an excuse, but as a pattern. Violence passed down, abuse repeated, self-worth shattered by forces they couldn't control, and in that internal collapse, they forget who they are. They mistake their damage for their identity. They become the shell around the wound instead of the light behind it. What the Buddhist view offers is a way back, not through denial, but through remembering. The task isn't to invent a new self, but to excavate the buried self that never left. In Tibetan Buddhism, this concept is so central it's given a name: Tathagatagarbha, the womb or embryo of Buddhahood that exists within all beings, even the worst of them, especially the ones who've forgotten themselves the most. In one text, the Nirvana Sutra, the Buddha uses several metaphors to describe this. He says, Buddha nature is like gold buried under a latrine, still gold no matter how foul the covering. He says it's like a seed within a rotting fruit, still capable of growing a beautiful tree, and most profoundly, he says it's like a treasure hidden beneath a poor man's hut. The man dies in poverty, never knowing he lived on wealth. That man is us, and it's also the person we judge the most, the one we write off, the one we hope never re-enters society. But from the Buddhist view, the crime isn't just what they did. The greater tragedy is that they never touched their own light. And what happens when society confirms their worthlessness? When prisons become places of punishment instead of transformation? When no one believes they can change? The Buddha's view stands in stark contrast. It doesn't mean everyone gets a free pass, it means no one gets abandoned. In modern times, this has inspired Buddhist outreach in some of the darkest corners of humanity. In Japan, chaplains visit death row inmates not to convert them, but to remind them of their own mind. In the US, Buddhist groups lead meditation circles in prisons, and in some cases, hardened men break down crying, because for the first time, someone doesn't treat them like monsters. This is not to say that evil doesn't exist. It's to say that even in evil, there is something deeper than evil, something untouched, something waiting. This approach doesn't just affect them, it affects us. Because if wholeness can exist even in the most lost person, it means we no longer have to fear our own darkness. We no longer have to exile the parts of ourselves that have failed. We stop cutting off the pieces of our story that don't look spiritual enough. The same compassion that sees light in others begins to see light in our worst moments. We begin to understand that we too are not the sum of our mistakes. That forgiveness is not about excusing behavior. It's about refusing to reduce a person to it. Buddha nature calls us out of the binary of good and bad. It says there's something deeper than morality, not to replace it, but to support it. A place where love doesn't depend on performance, where dignity is not given, it's revealed. Even in our current world, where headlines drip with cruelty, this truth remains steady. The angry politician, the violent protester, the bitter parent, the addict who relapses again, the partner who betrayed your trust. Somewhere in all of them is the same light. It may be buried, it may be ignored, but it's not gone. To accept this doesn't mean you allow harm. It means you look deeper than harm. It means you stop pretending that anyone is beyond transformation. Because if we exclude some from wholeness, we set conditions on truth. We start measuring who deserves healing. And that's not compassion, that's control. The Buddha taught that even Mara, the tempter, the embodiment of delusion, could be seen through, not destroyed, seen. And in that seeing, the illusion falls apart. When Mara visited the Buddha after his enlightenment, trying again to provoke him, the Buddha didn't react with fear or hatred. He greeted him like an old friend. Because even Mara is empty of fixed self. That's the level of clarity this teaching offers. It dismantles even our most cherished judgments, not to confuse us, but to set us free. And maybe that's what scares us, that if no one is truly evil, we'll have to face our own shadows too. We'll have to stop othering the worst parts of humanity and the worst parts of ourselves. But here's the gift. Once we see that wholeness includes the broken, the mind softens. The voice in your head that calls you too much, too damaged, too far gone, it loses its grip. You start to see your flaws not as proof you're failing, but as proof you're human. You start to understand that awakening doesn't erase pain, it transforms your relationship to it. And in time, that understanding extends to everyone. You begin to see beyond stories, beyond roles. You stop believing that goodness is reserved for the lucky few. You start to realize that awakening doesn't skip the wounded, it calls them first. So if there's someone in your life you can't forgive, start here. Not with the story, with the essence. Remind yourself that beneath everything you see, there is still Buddha nature. That even if they never awaken in this life, their essence remains pure, unstained, luminous. And if that feels impossible, start with yourself, because all judgment begins inwards. When you soften toward yourself, the world starts to look softer too, not because everyone changed, but because you did. You remembered something that had nothing to do with progress, nothing to do with perfection. You remembered that no being, no matter how far they've fallen, is outside the light. Not even you. If even the so-called imperfect carry the seed of awakening, then what does that say about the world that holds them? What kind of reality allows both cruelty and clarity, harm and healing, delusion and Buddha nature to coexist? We've seen that wholeness is hidden even in those we'd rather not forgive. But now, a harder question arises. What is it that holds all of this without collapsing? What kind of truth is wide enough to contain everything, yet grasp nothing? The answer is found not in form, not in personality, not in judgment or identity, but in what Buddhism calls sunyata. A word often misunderstood, misused, and feared. Translated as emptiness, but meaning something far more expansive. Not a void, not a blank, not a black hole where meaning dies, but a field so open, so boundless, so unstuck. It can hold everything and become nothing. A presence without weight, a truth without shape. The very substance of liberation. To grasp what sunyata really means, we first need to release the instinct to define. Because emptiness doesn't live inside concepts, it's the space between them. It's not a thing, it's the absence of false solidity. When we say something is empty in the Buddhist sense, we mean it doesn't have a fixed, independent, unchanging essence. It's not solid in the way the mind assumes. It's alive, interconnected, unpin-downable. A chair is not a chair by itself. It's wood, which was once tree, which was once seed, which needed sunlight, rain, soil, time, and human hands to become what it is now. Take away any of those, and the chair collapses. So is the chair truly a separate thing, or is it a temporary expression of many causes? Apply this to yourself. Are you a fixed self? Or are you a shifting event made of thought, body, memory, language, weather, upbringing, culture, breath? Who is the solid you that lives underneath it all? Look for it closely, and it disappears. But something remains. That something, fluid, vast, not owned, is the very ground of freedom. Sunyata is not saying nothing matters. It's saying nothing stands alone. Not your pain, not your name, not even your identity. All of it arises through conditions. All of it flows. When you begin to see that, everything becomes less heavy, less personal, less tight. You no longer carry shame like it's your identity. It becomes a weather pattern. It comes, it goes, it teaches, it fades. The same goes for joy, for grief, for the story you keep repeating. None of it is solid. It only feels that way when you cling to it. And this clinging is where suffering begins. We suffer not because things are empty, but because we keep trying to make them solid. We hold on to identities that hurt us. We cling to narratives that lock us in. We freeze people into villains or heroes, forgetting they too are in flux. And in doing so, we miss the truth. Nothing you experience can be possessed because nothing is permanent. This is not a tragedy. It's freedom. The heart of sunyata is not nihilism. It's aliveness. The flower is beautiful because it will fade. The breath is precious because it can't be stored. The moment is luminous because it will never return. Emptiness allows presence, because when you stop holding on to what isn't real, what's left is what's actually here. When the Buddha taught emptiness, he wasn't giving a philosophy to argue over. He was offering a key to end suffering. Because every attachment we suffer under is based on the illusion of solidity. We think we are our name, our status, our mistakes, our habits, our pride, our wounds, but these are just temporary clusters of causes. They aren't the self, because the self is not a noun, it's a verb. You're not a thing, you're a happening. And once you know this, not just intellectually, but directly, you begin to relax, not in a passive way, but in a wise way. You stop fighting so hard to control what cannot be controlled. You stop defending a self that was never truly threatened. You stop needing to be perfect because you realize that what you are is not stuck in any form. This is where wholeness through sunyata comes alive. Because if nothing has fixed essence, then everything has potential. If there is no solid self, there is also no broken self. There is just the present flow of causes meeting this moment, creating new possibilities. No one is doomed by their past. No one is locked in identity. Because no identity is absolute. Even your suffering is empty. That doesn't mean it's not real. It means it's not ultimate. It arises. It has causes. It can change. It doesn't define you. It passes through like a wave through water. And if you are the water, not the wave, then nothing that passes can destroy you. This is why emptiness is described as luminous in certain Mahayana texts. Not dark, but radiant. Not absence, but clarity. Because in the absence of fixed ideas, the world becomes soft, open, available. The tightness around the heart loosens. The labels fall away. And what's left is something wordless, but full. In the Heart Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism, the famous phrase declares, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." These are not opposites. They are two sides of the same coin. Your body, your voice, your fears, all of them are form, but their nature is empty. And because they are empty, they are free to appear, shift, and dissolve. This is what makes healing possible. If everything were fixed, then nothing could change. But because all things are empty of inherent self, they can transform. A habit can end. A wound can heal. A story can be rewritten. The very fact that you are not a fixed self means you are not limited to your past reactions. You can meet this moment differently. Sunyata also teaches us humility. When you see that your views are empty too, you stop needing to win. You stop assuming your perspective is the only one. You listen more. You defend less. You meet disagreement with curiosity instead of fear, and in relationship, this is transformative. Because it allows you to stop projecting fixed roles onto others. You stop demanding that people remain who they were yesterday. You give them room to be new. You give yourself that same room. Emptiness creates compassion, because when you see that no one is just their behavior, you begin to relate to the deeper process underneath. That person isn't cruel, they're reacting to pain. That person isn't cold, they've learned to protect themselves. That doesn't mean you excuse harm, but you understand it. And in that understanding, a new response becomes possible. Even conflict softens, because now you're not attacking a solid enemy, you're speaking to a fluid process, a being who is not finished, just like you. This is why meditation is so important in realizing sunyata, not because it makes you better at sitting still, but because it lets you observe directly how your thoughts, emotions, and sense of self arise and fade. You begin to notice that what felt so solid, your anger, your pride, your fear, is actually a passing pattern. You begin to trust the space more than the storm, and in that space, wholeness appears. Not as a perfected version of you, but as a clear seeing that what you are does not need to be clung to, fixed, or improved. Just lived, honestly, moment to moment. The great Zen teacher Dogen once said, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things." What he points to is this: when you stop grasping at your idea of who you are, you open to a wider truth. A truth not centered on me, but on what is. A truth not bound by fear, but rooted in participation. Because sunyata is not passive, it's not about disappearing, it's about becoming fully present in a world that never stands still. It's about being available to life, not behind armor, not inside a narrative, but right in the middle of the unfolding. And it's here that love becomes fearless. Because when love is empty of ownership, it can flow without fear. When you don't need someone to validate your identity, you can love them as they are. When you stop defining yourself by what you receive, you become free to give without condition. This kind of love is not fragile, it's not needy, it's spacious. It can hold sorrow and joy. It can include silence. It can survive distance. It arises from wholeness, not lack. And that's what sunyata ultimately offers. Not a removal from life, but a deeper entry into it. A way to live that is so clear, so awake, that you stop being distracted by what doesn't last and start giving yourself fully to what does. Not because it's permanent, but because it's real. The breath you're taking now is empty, but it's also sacred. The thoughts passing through are empty, but they carry insight. The self you keep trying to figure out is empty, but it's here, present, alive, capable of compassion, capable of transformation, capable of awakening. And when you stop trying to grasp that, and instead let yourself fall into the silence beneath it, you'll find something strange and familiar waiting. Not a new version of you, but the space that was always there. The space where wholeness isn't something added. It's what's left, when there's nothing left to hold. And as this truth settles into your body, you'll feel something shift, a kind of quiet joy, a release from the pressure to become anything other than this, and the wisdom to see that emptiness is not the end of the path. It's where the real path begins. If emptiness reveals that nothing is fixed and everything is in constant motion, then why do we cling so tightly to becoming someone else? Why does the mind, even after understanding the beauty of fluidity, still ache to improve, to evolve, to finally feel like it is enough? Emptiness teaches freedom from form, yet something inside insists on polishing identity as if it were a path to salvation. This next truth is not easy to face, but it may be the most liberating. That even the chase for self-improvement, when clung to, becomes its own kind of prison. There's a reason the desire to grow feels noble. It's celebrated. It's encouraged. From childhood, we're trained to always aim for better, to refine, achieve, evolve. And in many ways, this drive can lead to helpful change. The problem isn't growth itself. It's when growth becomes another mask we wear, another demand we place on ourselves, another reason we feel unworthy right now. This is the illusion of becoming. It whispers that who you are isn't enough, that peace lives just beyond the next transformation, that if you could just be more mindful, more disciplined, more healed, more something, then you'd finally deserve rest. Then you'd be whole. But in truth, this belief is the very thing keeping you in suffering. Because every time you reach a new level, the mind creates another one. Every time you heal something, a new flaw is found. The horizon keeps moving, and so you never arrive. The Buddha saw this clearly. He didn't teach a path of endless self-polishing. He taught a path of release, not from effort, but from attachment to outcomes, not from growth, but from the identity that demands constant proof it's improving. That identity becomes a subtle tyrant. It's dressed up in spiritual language, therapy speak, positive thinking, but it still says the same thing. You're not quite there yet. It doesn't matter whether the goal is enlightenment, success, or becoming your best self. The danger is in believing that your value depends on reaching it. This is how self-improvement turns into self-abandonment. Because in trying so hard to become someone new, you forget how to be with who you are now. Buddhist practice doesn't say, don't grow. It says, stop clinging. Stop needing the future version of yourself to redeem the present one. Because the obsession with fixing yourself often comes from the belief that you're fundamentally broken. That belief doesn't dissolve with achievements. It dissolves with attention. Attention is different from obsession. Attention listens. It watches. It holds space. Obsession analyzes, judges, and endlessly calculates what's missing. Attention says, this is what's here. Obsession says, this shouldn't be here. The great shift begins when you stop trying to upgrade the moment and start letting it speak. Even if it's messy, even if it's disappointing. There is more honesty in one breath of real presence than in years of trying to sculpt a perfect life. Letting go of self-improvement addiction doesn't mean giving up. It means surrendering the inner war. It means seeing that the version of you who wants to be better is often fueled by fear. Fear of not being loved. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being forgotten, unacknowledged, unseen. This fear creates tension. It creates performance. It turns your spiritual path into a project with checklists and deadlines. But awakening is not a result of performance. It's a byproduct of letting go. It emerges in silence, in non-resistance, in the space between your striving. One of the deepest paradoxes in Buddhist practice is that progress often comes when you stop trying to make progress. When effort is replaced with trust, when discipline is tempered by compassion, when you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Can I stay with this moment just as it is?" This doesn't mean you stop learning, or that you never take responsibility for your actions. It means your growth no longer comes from self-rejection. It means you don't use healing as a way to erase your past, but as a way to embrace it. You stop trying to replace your old self and instead hold it like a forgotten child. In Zen, there's a saying, "When you seek it, you cannot find it." The more desperately you try to become awake, the more distant awakening feels. Because the very seeking affirms the belief that you're separate from it, and that belief feeds the illusion of incompleteness. Even meditation can become part of this illusion, sitting not to meet yourself, but to get rid of discomfort, breathing not to feel, but to escape, repeating mantras not to quiet the mind, but to control it. These practices, without presence, turn into rituals of rejection. The solution is not to stop the practices, but to return to their source. To ask yourself, what am I hoping this will prove? And if the answer is that I'm good enough, then pause. And remember, you are not here to become good. You are here to remember the goodness that's already beneath your efforts. This is what true letting go looks like. Not apathy, but a deep trust in what arises, not giving up, but softening the grip of control. It looks like sitting with your sadness without fixing it, breathing through anxiety without pushing it away, letting your imperfections exist without constantly framing them as lessons. There is a kind of peace that only comes when you stop managing your experience, when you stop trying to harvest insight from every discomfort, when you stop using every feeling as a test of your evolution. This peace is quiet, unimpressive, but it's real. It comes when you allow stillness to be enough, when you let your ordinary self rest in the sacredness of this breath, this blink, this skin, this moment, without needing to decorate it with progress. Letting go of the addiction to becoming means no longer measuring your value by how well you're performing at being awakened. It means seeing that presence is not the reward for fixing yourself. It's the ground from which true change flows. This kind of change is not linear. It doesn't always make sense. It's not about milestones. It's about returning again and again to the place where you are not judged, not improved, not even understood, just witnessed. That place is your true refuge. It doesn't need effort. It doesn't need your past or your future. It doesn't care how many books you've read, how many breakthroughs you've had, how many rituals you've practiced. It only cares, are you here? Because only in being here can healing happen, not by striving, but by dissolving what obscures the wholeness already present. The striving mind cannot see this. It believes that safety comes from control, but presence reveals a different truth. That safety comes from surrender, that freedom comes not from reaching the top of the mountain, but from realizing the ground beneath your feet has been sacred all along. This is where you stop using transformation as a disguise, where you stop turning self-help into self-hate, where you stop making your humanity a problem to solve. You are not a problem. You are the awareness that sees problems arise and pass. You are not your wounds. You are the space that holds them. You are not your history. You are the silence beneath it. When you let go of becoming, you return to being. And being isn't static. It's not boring. It's not the end of ambition. It's the beginning of something deeper. A life rooted in clarity, not pressure. A life moved by compassion, not comparison. This life doesn't need you to be your best self. It needs you to be your real self. And that realness is not waiting on improvement. It's waiting on your permission to just be. So stop waiting. Let it begin here. When striving dissolves and the need to become fades, what remains is not silence in the absence of sound, but a silence that listens, responds, knows. This kind of stillness doesn't wait for permission, doesn't require proof, and doesn't argue for its own existence. It is whole without effort, present without invitation. It doesn't need to be explained. And perhaps this is why the deepest truths are often passed in silence. Long before words try to capture wisdom, something more honest moves between hearts. A glance, a gesture, a breath. This is where Zen begins, not with explanation, but with transmission. In the Zen tradition, the most transformative teachings are not spoken. They are not contained in books or scriptures or even sermons. They are transmitted directly, wordlessly, from teacher to student, mind to mind, presence to presence. It's not that Zen dismisses language, it simply knows its limits. It knows that what the heart needs most cannot be reduced to definition. There is a phrase that Zen holds at its core, a special transmission outside the scriptures, not founded upon words or letters, pointing directly to the human mind, seeing one's nature, and becoming Buddha. This is not poetry. It is practice. It points to the fact that realization is not something taught. It is something revealed in stillness and remembered in the space between thoughts. In many of the earliest Zen stories, the masters didn't lecture. They didn't try to convince. They used paradox. They used presence. They used silence. The most famous example is when the Buddha himself, surrounded by followers eager for his teaching, simply held up a flower. He said nothing. The crowd was silent. But one disciple, Mahakasyapa, smiled. In that moment, something passed between them. Not a lesson, but a recognition. That smile was the first silent transmission in Zen. It was the moment where truth leapt past the tongue and landed straight into the heart. What was transmitted? Not information, not philosophy, but wholeness. The kind that doesn't arrive because of learning. It emerges when all learning stops. Zen doesn't ask you to become better. It asks you to see clearly. And clarity often begins when words are no longer trusted to carry the full weight of what you are. This is why Zen koans, those strange and unanswerable riddles, are used, not to teach you facts, but to exhaust your need to explain, to bring the thinking mind to stillness and let awareness speak for itself. Because the truth Zen reveals is already in you, but your concepts stand in front of it. Your ideas about who you are, your ideas about enlightenment, even your ideas about Zen. These become veils, and words, if not treated carefully, reinforce them. That's why many Zen masters are known for doing the unexpected, striking the floor, laughing at questions, staying silent for hours. These gestures aren't distractions. They are reminders that nothing you are looking for is outside of your own seeing, that what you need is not more thought, but more presence. In the presence of a teacher who is deeply rooted in this awareness, something shifts. You begin to feel what the words cannot say, not as instruction, but as recognition. The teacher is not giving you something. They are showing you what you've been carrying the whole time. Their silence is not empty. It's full of seeing. This is why Zen often seems difficult to grasp. It's not that the teachings are confusing, it's that they ask you to let go of the need to grasp. They are not meant to be figured out. They are meant to undo the part of you that thinks awakening must be earned or proven. When the mind quiets, something ancient wakes up. A kind of knowing that existed before your name, before your beliefs, before language. It doesn't argue. It doesn't seek approval. It just sees. That seeing is wholeness, and it can't be transmitted by explanation, only by being. In Zen, the master doesn't present themselves as superior. They are simply someone who has seen through the illusion of incompleteness. They've stopped performing, stopped striving, stopped trying to decorate emptiness with identity, and in their quiet presence that same clarity begins to echo in others. This kind of transmission is not mystical. It's natural. It's what happens when someone deeply at peace sits with someone still in turmoil. The peace doesn't push, it doesn't fix, but it creates a field where the other can relax, where defenses soften, where self-improvement fades, and truth arises, not from study, but from recognition. That recognition might be sudden, or it might take years. It doesn't matter. The transmission is not measured in time. It's measured in depth. It's not about memorizing teachings. It's about being so present that the teachings become unnecessary. Wholeness doesn't arrive through study. It appears when the need to explain disappears. This is why silence is so powerful, not because it's empty, but because it's full of presence. In many Zen monasteries, practitioners sit together in silence for hours each day. They don't talk about their breakthroughs. They don't debate ideas. They just sit. And in that sitting, the layers begin to fall away. The need to improve, the desire to become, the urge to define. All of it slows down until only this breath remains. In that breath, something opens, and what it reveals cannot be spoken. It can only be lived. The beauty of silent transmission is that it doesn't exclude anyone. You don't need to be clever. You don't need to be spiritual. You don't even need to believe in anything. All that's needed is the willingness to sit, to listen, to stop pretending you don't already know. Because you do. There is a part of you that has never forgotten, never left, never needed fixing. It's the part that watches the thoughts rise and fall, that feels the breath without judging, that hears the silence behind the noise. This part of you doesn't speak in language, it speaks in being. Zen meets you there. It doesn't say, try harder. It says, let go. It doesn't ask, what's next? It asks, what's here? And in answering that question, not with words, but with attention, something shifts. The mind softens, the heart opens, and the self that was so desperate to improve begins to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into stillness. The same stillness passed down for centuries, not through books, but through presence, not through debate, but through sitting, not through answers, but through surrender. This is the transmission the Buddha gave with a flower, the one Mahakasyapa caught with a smile, the one passed down through generations of monks, not in secret formulas, but in eye contact, breath, stillness, a hand on the floor. This transmission lives in you too, not because you've studied, but because you're here. So the next time words fail you, don't panic. That's where Zen begins. Silence left something behind. Not a gap, not absence, but a quiet presence that cannot be named. It doesn't need translation or interpretation. It rests behind your eyes, steady and unshaken. You felt it when the striving stopped. You glimpsed it when the teacher said nothing. And yet, there's more. Because even that silence points to something deeper, a truth older than speech, wider than form, a seed that was never planted because it was always there. This is where we begin to uncover what Mahayana Buddhism calls Tathagatagarbha, not a metaphor, but the very heart of what you've always been. The word Tathagatagarbha can be broken down into two parts. Tathagata, a name the Buddha often used for himself, meaning thus come one or thus gone one, and Garbha, which means embryo, womb, or matrix. Together, they describe something radical. The Buddha nature, the full capacity for awakening, is not outside, not future, and not rare. It exists unspoiled in every being. Not as a possibility, as an already present reality. This teaching appeared in later Mahayana texts and shook the foundations of conventional belief, because it refused to divide the world into enlightened and unenlightened people. It refused to place the Buddha on a pedestal while leaving the rest of us in the mud. It said the Buddha is not a distant goal. The Buddha is the hidden core of your own mind. This changes everything. If the Buddha nature is already in you, you don't practice to become whole. You practice to clear away what conceals it. The work is not additive, it's subtractive. Not improving, but unveiling. Every act of awareness removes one more veil. Every moment of compassion wipes away another layer of dust. And what remains is not a better version of you. It's the original clarity that was there all along. This means that even in your deepest confusion, your most painful moments, the nature of awakening has never left you. It may have been forgotten, it may have been buried, but it was never removed. No trauma, no mistake, no belief, no behavior has the power to erase it. In fact, the more wounded a person is, the more sacred their journey becomes. Not because pain is noble, but because within that pain lies the untouched, the indestructible, the original nature that suffering could not reach. This view dissolves all hierarchy. No one is closer, no one is higher. Some may see more clearly, some may speak more skillfully, but no one has more light than anyone else. The difference is not in what's possessed, but in what's perceived. This is why the Tathagatagarbha teaching emphasizes uncovering over achieving. Enlightenment is not a prize at the end of a race. It's the recognition of what's already breathing underneath your story. Think of how often you define yourself by roles, emotions, or history, how tightly you grip your identity. The inner critic, the broken child, the lost one, the seeker, the achiever. These are like clouds. They seem so real, so thick, but they are passing weather, and behind them the sky has always been clear. That sky is Tathagatagarbha. It doesn't come and go. It doesn't need permission. It's not held up by belief. It remains untouched behind every experience. It is not personal. It doesn't belong to you, but it is always accessible. And yet, it often goes unnoticed. Why? Because the mind is trained to look outward, to seek validation, to measure itself, because conditioning says you must do something to become worthy. And so the simplest truth becomes the hardest to accept, that what you've been chasing is already here. To recognize this is not just an intellectual shift, it's a full-body awakening, a sense that you've stopped running, that the ground beneath your feet has always been the destination. Not because you figured it all out, but because you've stopped believing you have to. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is a phrase, like a golden statue wrapped in rags. It refers to Buddha nature covered by layers of habit, confusion, and fear. The practice is not to decorate the rags, it is to slowly remove them, one breath at a time, one act of stillness, one honest moment. What's revealed is not a spiritual identity. It's not, now I'm awakened. It's something beyond identity, something that doesn't need to be named, because it was never separate from the ordinary. It only seemed invisible because of distraction. Even now, it is not far. It is not in the future. It is not hidden behind years of practice. It is here. It reveals itself not in achievement, but in deep presence, in allowing the moment to be exactly what it is, in meeting yourself without agenda, without resistance, without hope of becoming something else. This is why Tathagatagarbha is not meant to inflate ego. It doesn't say you are special. It says everyone holds the same nature. The angry, the joyful, the violent, the loving. It levels all pride. It removes all shame. And in that leveling, what's left is equality that doesn't need proof. When you treat others as though they too carry Buddha nature, your interactions shift. Patience grows. Judgment softens. Even when someone's behavior is painful, you remember, this person too has a hidden core that suffering cannot reach, even if they've forgotten it, even if they fight it. That knowing becomes your ground. This doesn't mean accepting abuse. It doesn't mean ignoring harm. It means responding without forgetting the truth beneath the surface. It means resisting the temptation to reduce someone to their worst moment. In your own life, this view can change how you respond to failure. If the essence is already there, then mistakes don't define you. They become part of the uncovering. They become reminders of where you've strayed from presence. And they guide you back, not with guilt, but with humility. This humility is not weakness. It is strength, born of knowing that you don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to compete for wholeness. You don't have to earn the right to rest in yourself. The recognition of Tathagatagarbha is not the end of practice. It is the reason practice matters. Because every act of mindfulness, every moment of compassion, every time you breathe instead of react, it brings you closer to the light that has always been shining. It doesn't increase it, it uncovers it. This is what makes the path sustainable. When practice is about becoming someone else, it becomes exhausting. When practice is about returning to what you already are, it becomes joyful. It becomes nourishment instead of pressure. The teachings that support this view often use poetic language, mirrors, hidden treasures, seeds. Not because they are vague, but because they are pointing to something that cannot be pinned down. The essence is not an object. It is the ground of seeing itself. It can't be held, only lived. And you live it not by reciting doctrine, but by trusting silence, trusting stillness, trusting that the part of you that seeks is already held by something deeper. This trust grows slowly, not through force, but through resting in the truth over and over. Even when doubt arises, even when the mind rebels, you return, not because you have something to prove, but because it feels like home. The more you return, the less urgent the seeking becomes, the less tightly you grip your stories, the more naturally compassion arises, because you're no longer trying to fix yourself or others. You're simply responding from what's already whole. And that response, clear, simple, grounded, is the voice of Buddha nature speaking through your life. Not in grand gestures, but in the way you breathe before you speak, the way you pause before you judge, the way you hold pain without panic. This is not theory. It is transmission from your own heart to your own breath, to your own awareness. The Buddha was not pointing to himself. He was pointing to you, to the part of you that needs no improvement, to the part that knows without words, that sees without struggle, that loves without demand. It has always been there. Now is the time to uncover it. If what you are is already whole, already luminous, already present beneath the surface of every breath, then why does the search continue? Why, even after hearing that the Buddha nature has never left you, does the mind still grasp for more, still chase the next breakthrough, the next glimpse of clarity, the next experience to confirm what it already knows deep down? This is where the path folds back on itself, where the final obstacle is the very act of seeking. Not the kind born from longing, but the kind that assumes something is missing. And in the Dzogchen and Chan traditions, this subtle seeking is the last veil between you and the truth that never moved. At this point, the most radical teaching of all emerges. Stop looking. This doesn't mean abandoning sincerity. It doesn't mean apathy. It means understanding that the very act of chasing truth keeps you one step away from resting in it. Seeking implies a separation. It imagines a gap. It fuels the story that the present moment is not enough, that your awareness is still too dull, that something more refined, more sacred, more permanent must be found. But what if this is it? The Dzogchen tradition, rooted in Tibetan Buddhism, calls this direct recognition. It doesn't invite you to build elaborate systems or purify yourself over decades. It tells you clearly and without hesitation that your awareness in this very moment is already complete. It cannot be improved. It cannot be corrupted. It can only be overlooked. And it is overlooked, not because it's hidden, but because seeking keeps pulling the gaze away from what's here. The teachings speak of Rigpa, the clear, open, non-dual awareness that knows itself without thought. This awareness isn't created. It's revealed the moment grasping stops. Not reduced grasping, not controlled grasping. Stopped. This is why non-seeking is not about doing less. It's about doing nothing extra. Letting awareness rest in itself, not reaching forward, not reaching back, not identifying with the one who is trying to wake up, because the one who seeks awakening is often the one who's most in the way. Dzogchen doesn't ask you to fix your thoughts. It doesn't ask you to replace them with better ones. It simply says, look at the awareness that's noticing the thought. Rest there, before the reaction, before the evaluation. Just rest. In Chan Buddhism, which shares much of its spirit with Dzogchen, this same instruction is echoed through different metaphors. The clear mirror, the wind through trees, the moon in still water. These are not poetic decorations. They are precise descriptions of mind when it is no longer driven by grasping. Chan says, stop trying to get enlightenment. Stop making it another object in your collection. Because the moment it becomes something to achieve, you lose the thread. You turn what's immediate into a future goal. You forget that the treasure is already in your pocket. This is the paradox. The very desire to awaken is what obscures awakening. The more desperately you look, the less you see. The more you try to hold the moment, the more it slips. And yet, when you stop grasping, even for a heartbeat, what you've been searching for floods into view. This doesn't mean there's no value in practice. It means practice must be grounded in surrender. Meditation, in this view, is not effort, it's release. It's not counting the breath to tame the mind. It's letting the breath pass freely while noticing what's never moved. This noticing is not thinking. It's prior to thought. It is so quiet, so ordinary, that it often goes unnoticed. People overlook it because they expect fireworks. They expect drama. But awareness doesn't shout. It's not trying to impress you. It's just here. When the mind is very still, you see it. You see that you don't need to do anything to be aware. That thoughts arise, feelings surge, stories unfold, but awareness never changes. It holds all of it. And it doesn't judge. It doesn't choose. It doesn't prefer. It simply reflects. And here's the twist. That reflection is not passive. It's alive. It responds. It expresses itself as wisdom, as compassion, as silence. But it only flows freely when it's not being managed by the seeker. The seeker wants to improve, to control, to perfect the experience. But true awareness wants nothing. It already knows it is whole. So, what does it mean to stop seeking? It means to stop measuring, to stop comparing, to stop waiting for the perfect moment to finally rest. It means to stop asking whether you're doing it right, whether you're worthy, whether this moment is spiritual enough. It means to trust that presence does not need to be qualified. There's no final understanding that will make you ready. You're ready now. This is not about laziness. It's about trusting the nature of what already is. The way the ocean doesn't need your permission to be deep. The way the sky holds clouds without attachment. You don't have to push the wave. You only need to stop clinging to the shore. Non-seeking means resting as the wave, letting it rise and fall without grasping, without trying to escape, without turning the movement into a problem. Because when you rest in awareness, everything changes. Not because the world gets easier, but because you're no longer measuring your peace by how the world treats you. In this stillness, healing happens on its own. Not as a goal, but as a side effect of non-resistance. The mind that seeks tends to hold tension in the body. It contracts around each discomfort. It tries to outthink pain. But the non-seeking mind is spacious. It opens around what hurts. It includes what feels stuck. It says yes to what is, not to endorse it, but to meet it fully. And meeting is what changes things. Not analysis, not avoidance, just meeting. When you stop searching for the perfect version of your life, you begin to inhabit the real one. You see the colors more clearly. You feel the breath more fully. You start responding instead of reacting. There's less story, more contact. And in that contact, the illusion of incompleteness dissolves. Even if pain remains, it no longer defines you. Even if thoughts swirl, you're no longer inside them. Because non-seeking means returning to the one who sees, the one who's been watching the entire time. And that watcher is not a person, not a self, not a thinker. It is knowing itself, pure, open, spacious. You are not separate from that. You never were. So let the search fall away. Let the last question dissolve. Let this breath be enough, because it already is. When the seeking stops, what's left is what's always been here. Not absence, but fullness. Not blankness, but clarity without tension. The deeper you rest, the more apparent it becomes. Awakening isn't somewhere outside awareness, it's already woven into it. But still, the mind may ask, what about the body? What about thoughts, emotions, habits, memories? Are these things separate from wholeness? Are they barriers to freedom or part of it? The answer lies in something central to the Buddha's original teachings, what he called the 5 aggregates. But what if they've been misunderstood? What if, instead of obstacles to transcend, they're already expressions of the enlightened mind? The 5 aggregates are form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. They make up everything we believe ourselves to be, from the body that aches, to the moods that rise and fall, to the stories we carry about life. They are how we experience the world, how we interpret it, and how we believe a self is formed from it. But the Buddha did not teach the 5 aggregates to point out a self. He taught them to show that what we call self is a process, not a thing, not a core, not a solid identity, a process that continues moment by moment through contact, reaction, and awareness. And when clung to, this process creates the illusion of separation. However, the deeper truth is not that the aggregates are mistakes. It's that their nature, when seen clearly, is already free. The misunderstanding is not in the aggregates themselves, it's in the way they are grasped. Form is the body. Flesh, bones, muscles, sensations. Often thought of as crude or less spiritual. But nothing could be further from the truth. Form is not opposed to realization. It is one of its gates. In Zen, sweeping the floor, walking, breathing, these are not distractions from awakening. They are where it's found. The very act of standing, of chewing, of kneeling is sacred when not distorted by resistance. The body doesn't block clarity. It brings it to life. Wholeness includes the body because the body is not separate from the mind. The division only exists in concept. When presence is full, form expresses the sacred. Movement becomes stillness in action. Pain becomes part of the field, not a threat to it. Enlightenment isn't floating above physicality. It's feeling the body without rejection. Feeling is the next aggregate, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. These sensations arise instantly, often before thought. The mind interprets them, then reacts. But the feelings themselves are just energy, just messages. They aren't flaws. They don't point to something wrong. They are alive, honest, and fleeting. Their impermanence reveals their nature. In non-clinging, feelings don't dominate. They pass like clouds. They are no longer chains, just visitors. When a feeling arises and awareness meets it without identification, it becomes part of wholeness, not an interruption. It doesn't need to be changed, only met. And in that meeting, the heart softens. Even pain becomes sacred. Perception follows. Our ability to recognize patterns, name objects, interpret events. It's how we know the difference between a tree and a door, a frown and a smile. It helps us survive, relate, and navigate the world. But it also labels things quickly, sometimes wrongly. It creates categories, sometimes too tightly. When believed without question, perception becomes confusion. But perception itself is not the enemy. It's when perception is seen as fixed that problems arise. In truth, perception is just another function of awareness, like a lens that shapes experience but never owns it. Enlightenment doesn't destroy perception. It refines it, makes it clearer, more open, more kind. When free from grasping, perception helps us meet others with fewer assumptions. It sees without immediately defining. It hears without immediately judging. That is not absence of perception. That is its purification. Mental formations are more complex. These are thoughts, intentions, habits, patterns of emotion, memory, often the most active part of the mind. They shape the way we experience everything else. Some are rooted in love, others in fear, and when left unseen, they solidify into beliefs that define our sense of self. But just like the others, mental formations are not inherently problematic. They are empty of fixed essence, which means they can shift. They are not chains unless we grip them. They are not walls unless we believe they're real. A thought that arises and passes is no threat. It becomes dangerous only when mistaken for the truth. When a thought is seen as a thought, it loses its sting. It's not erased. It's just no longer the director. It becomes another part of the field of experience, neither praised nor feared. Mental formations in their true nature are like ripples, reflecting the deeper mind, but not binding it. Consciousness is the last aggregate, the awareness of sensory contact, the knowing of a sound, a touch, a smell. In its untrained state, consciousness clings to what it perceives. It fuses with experience. It builds identities out of fleeting impressions. But in its purified form, consciousness reflects without grasping. This is where the aggregates begin to dissolve their boundaries. Because consciousness, when no longer driven by craving, begins to shine through all experience. It's not different from the clarity spoken of in Dzogchen. It's not apart from the mirror mind of Zen. It's the same capacity to know, to feel, to include, all without possession. Together, these 5 aggregates form the basis of what we think we are. But they are not problems to escape. They are expressions of reality. The misunderstanding comes from believing they define a self. The freedom comes from realizing they are empty, impermanent, and yet fully whole in their unfolding. The enlightened mind doesn't reject the aggregates. It doesn't float above them. It moves through them without entanglement. It uses the body, feels sensations, recognizes patterns, watches thoughts, perceives consciousness, and yet remains unstuck. Not because it avoids, because it includes. This inclusion is what makes freedom accessible in every moment, not only on the cushion, not only in silence, but in the chaos of a busy street, the tightness of heartbreak, the confusion of change. Every part of experience is made of the aggregates, and every aggregate, when held with awareness, becomes the field of realization. The teachings don't ask us to get rid of our humanity. They ask us to meet it fully, to see that the very things we thought disqualified us, the aches, the emotions, the spinning mind, are the places where wholeness is waiting to be seen. When you stop pushing the aggregates away, they open. They reveal their fluid nature, their transparency. They become windows instead of walls. And through those windows, light pours in, not from outside, but from the space that was always there. This is not philosophical comfort. It's practical liberation. It means you don't have to wait for your body to be calm before you rest in truth. You don't need your emotions to be balanced, your thoughts to be quiet, your mind to be still. You need only to stop mistaking these things for who you are. You are the field in which they rise, and the field is not broken. It's awake, always. If even your thoughts, feelings, and form are already part of wholeness, then what about pain? What about the grief that arrives without warning, the betrayal that splits the heart open, the anxiety that lingers even in stillness? It's easy to speak of presence when the body feels light and the mind feels calm. But what happens when suffering comes? Does wholeness disappear? Or is it still there, quiet, intact, beneath the weight of sorrow? This is where the teaching of the second arrow offers something that changes how we see everything. Not a solution for pain, but a doorway into the truth that pain never erases what's real. The Buddha once explained suffering through a simple but profound image. He said that when someone is struck by an arrow, it hurts. That is the first arrow. Life, being what it is, brings discomfort, loss, physical pain, emotional hurt. But then comes the second arrow. This one is different. It is self-inflicted. It is the mental reaction, the resistance, the story layered over the pain. The second arrow is the judgment, the fear, the shame, the rumination that follows the original wound. And this is the one that causes the most suffering. The first arrow is inevitable. The second is optional. This doesn't mean you should be indifferent to pain. It means that pain is not the problem. It's the mind's response to pain that creates deeper harm. The first arrow may strike the body or the heart. The second strikes the sense of self. It says, "This shouldn't be happening. I must have failed. Something is wrong with me." The second arrow turns pain into identity. But wholeness doesn't break under pressure. It doesn't retreat when pain arrives. If anything, it reveals itself more fully in pain, because suffering exposes what's true without our defenses. It shows us what matters. It shows us how deeply we want to be met. It shows us that even in heartbreak, there's something underneath that's still aware, still steady, still present. This awareness is what the second arrow tries to distract you from. Because the mind wants to manage pain, explain it, protect against it happening again. So it turns toward blame, guilt, fantasy, comparison, withdrawal. These reactions may feel protective, but they add another layer between you and presence. The teaching is not about silencing emotion. It's about seeing clearly what belongs to pain and what belongs to resistance. The tear in the eye, the heaviness in the chest, the ache of loss. These are part of the human experience. They are not failures. They are responses. They rise and fall like weather. But when the mind says, "I shouldn't feel this," it adds a layer that does not serve you. That's the second arrow. The practice is to let pain be what it is without turning it into a self. To feel it directly, fully, without needing it to say anything about your worth. The moment you stop identifying with the suffering, you begin to see it differently. You see that the pain moves, but the awareness remains. That the ache lives in a larger space that doesn't collapse under its weight. Wholeness is that space. It includes the grief, the anger, the regret, but it is not reduced by them. The essence of who you are, the awareness that sees, has never been wounded. It holds the experience, but is not defined by it. This is not to deny the reality of trauma or hardship. It is to say that even in the darkest moments, something in you has remained untouched. This untouched part is not separate from the suffering. It is the container in which the suffering appears. And when you rest in that container, even for a moment, something opens. The pain may not vanish, the situation may not change, but your relationship to it shifts. It becomes part of life, not the end of it. This is what makes the second arrow so important to understand. Because in letting go of the second arrow, you don't escape pain. You escape the illusion that pain is your identity. You stop wearing it like a badge or hiding it like a secret. You let it move through you, and in doing so, it loses its grip. There is dignity in this, a quiet strength. Not the strength to fix everything, but the strength to stay present even when you can't. That paradox is at the heart of this teaching. You do not need to overcome suffering to be whole. You are whole while suffering moves through you. This view changes how we see others too. When someone is in pain, we often rush to solve it, to advise, to fix. But often, what they need is simply presence, not words, not theories, just the warmth of someone who isn't flinching, who isn't pulling away. That presence, when it comes from someone who knows they are whole, even in pain, becomes a mirror. It says, "You don't have to be better right now. You're not wrong for feeling this." And something in the other person softens. The second arrow creates isolation. It says, "I'm the only one like this. I'm too sensitive. I should be stronger." The release of the second arrow reconnects you to humanity, to everyone who's ever sat in darkness and doubted their light, to every breath shared in silent suffering. Even in the most painful states, rage, despair, shame, the second arrow can be paused, not through force, but through recognition. You notice the extra story, the added judgment, the familiar narrative of unworthiness, and instead of feeding it, you breathe, you listen, you let the pain be pain without letting it define the whole moment. Over time, this becomes a new habit, a deeper trust, not in outcomes, but in presence. You trust that being here, with what is enough. You stop demanding that pain teach you something. You stop needing it to justify itself. You let it exist. And in that space, you notice something beneath it, something steady. This is the true gift of understanding the second arrow. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about recovering your relationship to it. Seeing that what hurts doesn't have to turn into suffering. That hurt can be part of the story without taking over the whole book. When you rest in that understanding, the next painful moment doesn't become an emergency. It becomes part of the rhythm of life, not welcomed, but not feared, not denied, but not exaggerated. You learn to meet it with honesty, and that honesty is what reveals the wholeness that never left. You begin to trust the silence beneath your thoughts, the breath beneath your grief, the space behind the ache. You stop asking pain to validate your path. You start allowing it to move through you without resistance. In that movement, you remember something important. You are not the wound. You are the space that holds it, and that space has never been broken. The wound was never the problem. What deepens suffering is forgetting that even while pain moves through the heart, something steady remains. Something beneath emotion, beneath thought, beneath every loss. That steadiness is not waiting on healing. It's already here. And once seen, it starts revealing itself in places no one expects. In traffic, in noise, in boredom, in heartbreak, in the texture of daily life that so many believe is in the way. But what if it's not in the way? What if the truth we seek isn't hidden in stillness or purity or transcendence, but in the messy, imperfect fabric of daily experience? This is where the illusion begins to fall apart. The illusion that nirvana lies elsewhere and that ordinary life must be escaped to find it. Buddhist teachings often speak of two concepts that seem to be opposites: samsara and nirvana. Samsara is the cycle of birth and death, desire and fear, gain and loss. Nirvana is said to be liberation, freedom from that cycle, the cessation of suffering. But many misread this contrast. They assume samsara is the prison and nirvana is some far-off escape, something to reach after lifetimes of practice, something apart from the pain and routine of daily life. But this duality, when held too tightly, creates its own suffering. It becomes another version of the second arrow, a spiritual rejection of what is. What the deeper teachings point to, especially in Mahayana Buddhism and Zen, is not escape from the world, but intimacy with it. Not distance from experience, but complete presence within it. The illusion is not samsara. The illusion is that samsara is a separate place, a broken realm we must climb out of. But the great masters repeatedly say, samsara is nirvana when seen with wisdom. This doesn't mean there is no suffering. It means suffering doesn't have to be separate from awakening. It means the same thoughts, the same dishes, the same arguments, the same longing. These, too, are where liberation appears. Not because they're pleasant, not because they go away, but because they are not separate from the truth. The core misunderstanding is the belief that enlightenment happens somewhere else, that it's a rarefied state achieved only after perfecting the mind or purifying the heart. But when you look closely, you'll find something more subtle and more beautiful. Enlightenment is simply the absence of resistance to this moment. Not an altered experience, but a clear seeing of what's already here. It doesn't need silence. It doesn't need perfection. It needs your presence. What changes the texture of samsara is not escape. It's recognition. The moment you stop wishing things were different, you notice the life that's always been beating beneath the surface. When there's no longer a struggle to fix, to transcend, or to escape, a softness returns. The very moment you thought was mundane becomes vivid. The so-called ordinary reveals itself as extraordinary. This is why so many Zen teachings point to everyday life as the field of awakening. Carrying water, chopping wood, sweeping the floor, these are not distractions from practice. They are the mirror in which practice reflects. If you cannot find wholeness in making tea, you will not find it in meditation halls or philosophical texts. Because wholeness is not in the act, it's in the attention. In this way, samsara is not the opposite of nirvana. It's nirvana misperceived, misunderstood, taken to be solid, permanent, painful in essence. But pain, when clearly seen, is not the same as suffering. Pain arises. Suffering arises from our resistance, our clinging, our denial. When that resistance softens, the pain remains, but it becomes part of something bigger, something whole. The daily frustrations, the exhaustion, the disappointment, these are not proof that you're far from awakening. They are the exact places where awakening is tested, invited, made real. It's easy to feel calm in a quiet room. It's a different kind of realization to feel calm in the middle of uncertainty. But both moments are part of the same field. This is what it means to live in wholeness, not to avoid samsara, but to live so deeply within it that the borders dissolve. That doesn't mean becoming passive, it means becoming intimate. Intimate with your reactions, intimate with discomfort, intimate with joy when it comes and sorrow when it stays. The path isn't somewhere else. It is this breath, this step, this phone call, this silence. When the idea of escape disappears, presence expands, and that presence is not exotic. It doesn't glow. It doesn't announce itself. It just allows everything to be seen clearly. In that clarity, nothing is missing. To believe that nirvana lies outside of samsara is to split your life into sacred and profane, worthy and unworthy, awakened and asleep. That division is what deepens the sense of being lost. Because then you start comparing each moment to an ideal, and every ordinary moment feels like a failure. But the true practice is in seeing that the ideal itself is illusion, that the search for a perfect state is just another form of clinging. When you release the idea that awakening must feel a certain way, you begin to notice it was never absent, even the thought, this can't be it, is it? In the Chan tradition, this truth is expressed simply, this mind is Buddha. Not a special mind, not a cleansed mind, this very mind, the one with thoughts, with distractions, with desire, not because those things are enlightened, but because what sees them is not touched by them. When you return to the seeing, the drama of samsara loses its hold. And yet, life continues. Bills are still due, bodies still age, loved ones still leave. But even in all of this, there is something that doesn't move. The background doesn't change. Awareness remains steady. That awareness is not waiting on freedom. It is freedom, misunderstood as struggle. When people say, I just want peace, they often mean they want life to stop being difficult. But the deepest peace isn't the absence of difficulty. It's the end of believing difficulty means something is wrong. When you stop fighting experience, experience stops feeling like the enemy. This is not about liking pain. It's about not needing pain to justify your sense of growth. It's about allowing life to be what it is, messy, unpredictable, alive, without losing your balance. That balance isn't created by controlling samsara. It's found by no longer pushing against it. Even when life is quiet, the mind may still whisper, "This isn't enough." But that whisper doesn't need to be silenced. It needs to be seen, recognized as another ripple in the field. Samsara speaks through craving. Nirvana hears it and does not follow. That hearing, that clear seeing, that soft awareness, this is what transforms everything. Not by removing you from life, but by placing you deeply inside it. The path is not above the world, it's within it. It's in how you listen, how you breathe, how you speak when no one's watching. This shift can't be forced. It comes when striving exhausts itself, when the mind grows tired of climbing stairs that never end, when the heart, in its exhaustion, turns back to what has always been steady, and what it finds there is not new. It's the same silence that was waiting behind every noisy moment, the same stillness in the center of every storm, the same wholeness in every scattered thought. The illusion was that you were far away. The truth is, you never left. Before the ox's story unfolds, remember all the other paths you've walked. The teaching on wholeness in ordinary life, the recognition that seeking itself obscures truth. These were not destinations, but gentle returnings. Each lesson loosened a grasp. Each insight brightened the space around your being. Now, as intentions soften and the mind pauses, here comes one of Zen's oldest maps. Not maps for finding something new, but reminders that what you've been searching for was always within reach. Something silent, something unlost. Even the ox herding series begins without ceremony, with a question easier to ask than to hear. Where have you been all this time? The first image in the series speaks through absence. There is searching, yes, but also confusion. A boy stands at the edge of wilderness, uncertain, aware of lack. This isn't symbolic. You feel it when you realize the part of you that longed for peace never left you. You feel it when you recognize how exhausting the search has been, not because it was wrong, but because it lost touch with the simple presence under you. As the herding unfolds, there is the moment of finding. Not like capturing a wild beast, but noticing that the ox has been standing just beyond the veil of thought. The meeting isn't dramatic, it's not triumphant. It's quiet, honest. There's relief, and for a moment, peace feels possible. Yet Zen doesn't stop there. The ox must be tamed. In the next phases, there is practice, not out of striving, but out of attention. Training isn't about earning worth. It's about gently guiding energy. You learn self-restraint, presence, non-reactivity. You begin to witness yourself walking through life with a mind that once ran wild, untamed. You learn to invite tenderness into your internal landscape. You learn to rest, not by changing who you are, but by recognizing what you are. Soon the ox and the herder move together as one. There is no hushing of energy. no severing of wildness, only unity. You notice this in your own life when your actions flow from calm rather than control. You feel it in moments when you reply with clarity instead of reaction. When presence meets presence, the separation dissolves. Stillness moves. Movement is stillness. The whispered division between doing and being softly fades. Then comes the return. The ox is let go. Not abandoned, not lost again. Released because the herder knows that nothing can be held. You sense something shift as you loosen belief in the path, the goal, the journey itself. Control releases, certainty softens, and oddly, freedom appears. Not freedom from experience, but freedom to be with it completely. And then the herder returns to the marketplace. No drama, no separation, just presence in the heart of ordinary life. The mystery of awakening is not where there is no noise, but where noise is not an interruption. The same awareness, waved off in silent mountains, sits with you amid dinner dishes, email threads, and evening conversations. The difference isn't quantity of peace, it's the way every action carries the trace of that peace. In the final image, the herder and ox both forgotten, not because they've disappeared, because they were never separate to begin with. There is no herder, no ox, just the clear path of living. Mind is mind, world is world. No barriers, no achievements, just life, nothing more, but also nothing less than everything. These ancient pictures do not tell a story of becoming. They show the process of uncovering. They don't explain, they resonate. They invite recognition. They ask only that you see, that you feel, that you remember your own home, the one you thought you were searching for, but never really left. The ox-herding pictures hold no ideas about enlightenment, no rules, no certifications. Just a way of looking, a way of being with what is. And in their simplicity lies depth. Because you don't need vast knowledge to wake up. You need absence of absence. You need the end of searching. Everything else arises from that. So now, stay. Breathe. Feel the space that is wide enough to hold everything. Your story, your longing, your silence, your wounds, your joy. This is home. This is already yours. Let the pictures speak not through your thinking, but through your resting. The path is complete when the search unravels. The journey ends where it began, in the quiet, abiding presence of your own mind, healed not by arriving, but by returning. The urge to believe we're broken is subtle, yet pervasive. After moments of peace, a quiet voice interrupts. Something is still wrong. That voice often becomes the undercurrent of spiritual work, therapy, and self-help. We begin to live as if healing or transformation is a destination we'll one day reach. But the Buddha's central teaching of the middle way invites us to step off both extremes, the drive to fix ourselves into perfection and the passive acceptance of who we are without wisdom. This path of balance is not easy. It requires us to look squarely at both longing and fear and learn to walk between them with clarity. Many spiritual paths begin with a conviction. If I can just change enough, then I'll be free. We adopt practices, mindset shifts, dietary rules, affirmations, anything that promises a better self. That motivation isn't evil. It often arises from pain. But behind it lies a myth that who you are today is not enough, that your awareness, your compassion, your life must be improved before they can bear witness to their own wholeness. This belief fuels exhaustion and self-judgment even when we make progress. The harder we strive, the more we reinforce the idea that true self-worth depends on future attainment. On the other extreme lies resignation, a mindset of "I must accept how I am," often used as a mask. When acceptance becomes complacency, we stop listening to pain. We tell ourselves we've arrived. We ignore invitations toward deeper inspection or care. Acceptance is valuable, but if not balanced by skillful action, it can turn into denial or stagnation. The middle way holds both clarity and love. It honors the wish to heal without using shame as fuel. It honors acceptance without becoming resignation. It allows bold intention, but invites surrender when intention becomes fixation. How does this play out in daily life? Imagine early in the morning when restless thoughts wake you. The drive to fix your anxiety may come from love, but if it escalates into "I must cure this immediately" or "I'm weak," it becomes its own suffering. The body tightens, the mind churns, the heart feels heavier. The middle way asks, can you notice the sorrow and still meet the body with kindness? Not fix the anxiety, but offer presence. The path is not erasing fear, it's opening to it and listening through it. In practice, this shifts how you work in the world. Instead of asking, "How productive can I be?" you ask, "How can I act today in a way that includes my limits?" You don't reject busyness or aimlessness, both can serve and bind. The middle way encourages flexibility. When tired, rest. When capable, engage, and remove nothing from your presence. The middle way also redefines change. When you change behavior, mindset, or habit, it's not because you're broken, it's because you care. When you stop viewing change as correction and start viewing it as deepening, transformation becomes joyous and intelligent, not oppressive. This view dissolves burnout, because transformation is no longer fueled by shame. You don't have to work all the time. You don't have to struggle day after day to be worthy. Transformation becomes part of presence, not a condition of presence. On a cultural level, modern society amplifies extremes. We sell the idea that health, wealth, image, career, spiritual status, all must be upgraded. Social media fuels discontent, turn by turn, each scroll exposing a yardstick. The middle way is resistance. It says, this life is not a glitch. You're permitted to rest between achievements. It's not anti-progress, it's pro-being. When an illness strikes, the middle way frees you from self-reproach. Instead of believing you're broken because you're ill, you begin to learn how your life needs to reorder around care. You learn compassion empirically. You learn that your self-worth isn't contingent on health. You learn your body isn't a project, but also not ignored. In relationships, the middle way helps you meet others without forcing an ideal or abandoning your boundaries. You can love without attachment, honor differences without splitting, and speak truth without violence. You understand that flaws are openings for connection, not threats to your peace. Even in grief, the middle way liberates. It teaches you to mourn deeply without becoming lost in sorrow, to remember with love without swallowing your life in endless longing, to honor the loss and still breathe. A key realization: when you pursue wholeness by erasing pain, the pain screams louder. Emotional tension often reveals precisely where grace is needed. When you stop erasing and start acknowledging, healing begins organically, without armor, without masks. Balance grows from daily habit. The email you don't have to write tonight, the apology you choose to speak, the laughter you allow, the tears you don't rush to hide. These choices, small and seemingly unrelated, ripple outward into your sense of safety, belonging, and aliveness. Balance also surfaces on the cushion. When a difficult emotion comes, you don't reject the sit, but you don't cling to either meditation bliss. You just rest in what is, allowing attention to remain present. Every emotion is a teacher, never your identity. We must acknowledge this path is not easy. It requires more courage than extremes, and in the beginning, extremes feel stable. Effort feels productive, resistance feels safe, stagnation feels restful, but nothing grows in certainty. Wisdom is uncomfortable. It asks you to stand without falling, to hold without collapsing. That's why the middle way must be practiced visibly, in speech, in action, in social media habits, in lifestyle choices, in rest. Balance cannot be cloaked. It must be lived through visible humility. And when we live it, we become models for those around us. Parenting transforms, leadership changes, culture shifts. Because every generation raised to believe brokenness is normal will reap fear and performance compulsions. When the middle way is embodied, we begin to breathe wider, not because struggle ends, but because struggle no longer defines life. Over time, the internal conflict between improvement and worthiness dissolves. Energy formerly spent proving we matter can be reclaimed for relationship, creativity, compassion. Instead of chasing validation, we hold it ourselves, and then we can share it radically. In the end, the middle way doesn't give you a better life. It helps you live this one with integrity. Wholeness emerges organically when the extremes cease serving their purposes. It doesn't arrive because you've earned it. It rises because you've stopped blocking it. You are not broken. You are not complete. You are balance walking, and that is enough. So many paths try to fix the mind, tame the chaos, polish the flaws. But what if there's a place within you that doesn't need fixing at all? What if awareness itself, the very thing that watches your thoughts, has never been broken? This isn't philosophy. This is direct experience. And it's the heart of Dzogchen. Dzogchen doesn't ask you to climb. It asks you to rest. Not because effort is bad, but because the treasure isn't at the top of some mountain. It's underneath everything, already glowing. What if the light you've been searching for was the one looking through your eyes all along? The Tibetans have a word for this, Rigpa. It means pure awareness, not the thoughts in your head, not the stories you tell, not even the witness of meditation. Rigpa is the effortless clarity that never leaves. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't change. It doesn't care if you're having a good day or drowning in despair. It just is, and it's always whole. Rigpa isn't something you earn. It's what remains when all effort fades. That's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to become awakened, you find what was never unawakened. Dzogchen doesn't give you new tools. It removes the tools, because what needs to be recognized is beyond strategy. This is where most seekers get trapped. They sit with their thoughts, trying to fix them, clean them, purify them. But Rigpa isn't the result of cleaner thinking. It's what watches the storm without ever becoming it. The cloud passes, but the sky doesn't worry. Awareness isn't disturbed by what moves through it. People often confuse their mind with their being, but the mind is a river. Rigpa is the space through which that river flows. You can spend lifetimes rearranging the river, or you can notice the vastness in which it moves. That noticing changes everything. There's a moment in Dzogchen practice called the direct introduction. A master doesn't explain Rigpa to you. They point, not to an idea, but to an experience. The goal isn't to make you believe, it's to help you recognize. Once that recognition lands, no teacher is needed. You become the seeing, you become the light. The ordinary mind says, "I'm not good enough yet." Rigpa doesn't speak that language. It doesn't measure, it doesn't compare, it doesn't even call itself aware. It just shines. The moment you drop the layers, the roles, the spiritual ambition, what's left is Rigpa. It's not dramatic, it's not fireworks, it's still, but it's more alive than anything you've ever known. This awareness isn't cold, it's full of warmth, not the emotional warmth of sentiment, but the radiant compassion that comes from seeing clearly. When you rest in Rigpa, you stop fighting yourself. You stop arguing with your experience. You stop splitting your mind into what's acceptable and what's not. Wholeness is no longer a goal, it's a fact. Every teaching in Dzogchen comes down to this. Stop mistaking the waves for the ocean. Don't chase stillness. Don't chase insight. Notice what never moves. Even when you're lost, Rigpa is not. Even when you doubt, Rigpa doesn't. It holds the joy, the pain, the confusion, the clarity, all without needing any of it to change. That doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes real. And when you live from Rigpa, you stop playing the game of fixing. You stop turning healing into a job. You start trusting what's always been enough. This is why Dzogchen teachers speak less and point more, why they value silence over theory, because language will always miss. It can describe the moon, but it cannot reflect its light. Rigpa is not a theory. It's the moonlight on your skin when the words finally stop. This resting is not passivity. It's the deepest kind of presence. It's not doing nothing. It's doing nothing extra. It's showing up without armor. It's meeting each moment without needing to control it. Because when awareness is recognized as whole, you stop needing to fix the flow of your life. You trust its intelligence. You trust its timing. You trust its enoughness. And here's the most surprising part. Rigpa isn't rare. It's not for monks on snowy peaks. It's not hidden in texts or locked behind rituals. It's so close most people miss it. It's the awareness that hears these words, the stillness between your thoughts, the clarity that never left. Even when you're confused, Rigpa isn't. Even when your emotions surge, it remains undisturbed. And this doesn't mean you escape life. It means you show up fully, but without the weight. You speak, love, laugh, cry, But it all happens inside the space that doesn't break. You don't have to stop thoughts to rest in Rigpa. You don't have to become pure. You don't have to feel calm. You simply have to stop looking somewhere else. Let the thoughts be. Let the noise come. And notice the one who notices. That's the return. Not to a new version of yourself, but to the one who was never divided in the first place. Rigpa doesn't change you. It reveals what was always true. And once you've seen it, once even a sliver of that stillness is touched, it's unforgettable. Not because it dazzles you, but because it feels like home, like something inside you finally exhaled. You are not the one searching. You are the openness in which the search appears. The teachings of Dzogchen don't make you better. They help you remember. That's why the masters say, don't try to improve the mind. Recognize the awareness behind it. That's the invitation to stop chasing, to stop dividing, to rest. And in that rest, to remember that awareness, your awareness, is already whole. Let's stay here a little longer, not rushing to the next idea, just resting, just noticing, just letting the light of Rigpa shine through all the layers we thought we needed. And feeling even now that maybe, just maybe, we were never broken to begin with. Even the most intricate answers unravel under the weight of silence. The previous path led us to see awareness not as something gained, but as something always present. But what if that presence doesn't need to be understood at all? What if the final liberation is not in discovering more, but in resting inside the absence of need to discover anything further? There is a kind of knowing that does not come from gathering facts, nor from intense analysis, but from allowing the mind to dissolve its grip on needing to know. In Zen, this is called don't know mind. At first, it feels like surrendering clarity. In truth, it's surrendering the illusion that clarity must always come with explanation. And in that surrender, a strange light begins to shine. This mind doesn't rush to define. It listens. It does not interrupt. It waits. And in that waiting, something gentle emerges, not a new concept, not a final answer, but an openness that cannot be taught and cannot be owned. It is the silence underneath your name, the breath before speech, a kind of peace that never demands proof. Not knowing strips away the performance of certainty. It asks nothing from life except to be met honestly. This honesty does not need credentials or authority. It just stands as it is, vulnerable, alert, quietly alive. And from this place, something radical begins to grow. A trust, not in what is known, but in what is here. The power of not knowing is its refusal to reduce life into manageable parts. It doesn't need to pin things down to make them real. In fact, it sees the beauty in what escapes the net, the joy in not needing every detail, the relief in not managing everything. When this mind is present, freedom isn't a peak to reach. It's the ground you've been standing on all along. When the craving for identity relaxes, the body begins to soften. The breath deepens. The need to explain who you are, what you want, and why you're here begins to fade. And in its place is the tender silence of this moment, unfolding, unfiltered, unjudged. This is not laziness. It's aliveness, pure and unscripted, a child looking at the world without the fog of concepts, not because the child is empty, but because nothing is in the way. That same clarity waits behind every adult mind, behind the efforts, behind the knowledge, behind the roles we rehearse. Letting go of needing to know does not mean abandoning discernment. It means seeing without grasping, acting without clinging, loving without controlling. It means letting reality present itself in its own language, on its own terms. Spiritual seeking often begins with a hunger for truth, but eventually even truth becomes too small to hold what's actually happening. Words break, teachings fade, systems crack, and there you are, still breathing, still here, still not knowing, and suddenly that is enough. In the heart of don't know mind, love becomes simpler. It's no longer strategic or idealized. It becomes the capacity to stay with someone, not because you understand them, but because you don't have to. You stop projecting, you stop fixing, you stop assigning meaning. And in that stopping, love breathes again. Not knowing also dissolves fear, because fear feeds on the need for certainty. It builds its walls from forecasts and scenarios and what-ifs. But if you do not require the future to be clear, then fear has nowhere to live. It dissipates like mist under morning sun. The deepest wisdom in many traditions does not come in answers. It comes in presence. A teacher who smiles without needing to explain. A mountain that sits in silence. A cup of tea handed to you without commentary. This is not the absence of meaning. It is the refusal to limit it. When the mind stops needing to define everything, intuition begins to whisper. Not the loud voice of desire or fear, but the subtle guidance of alignment. A sense of rightness without explanation. A direction felt, not argued. This kind of clarity does not come from thought. It comes from contact with reality, with life, with self, stripped of story. Even your deepest suffering, when held in this space, changes shape. You no longer ask, "Why me?" or "What does this mean?" You stop building narratives around pain. You just sit with it, as it is, and somehow this dissolves its grip, because pain thrives on resistance, but in presence it moves. This non-knowing isn't passive, it's curious, it wonders but doesn't demand. It feels but doesn't panic. It observes but doesn't conclude. It's the mind of the beginner, the artist before the brush hits canvas, the musician before the first note, a readiness to meet what comes without insisting it match a plan. You start to realize that most suffering is born not from life, but from your interpretations, from the pressure to resolve, from the need to appear certain, from the hunger to always make sense. And when that pressure is released, life becomes surprisingly gentle, even in its chaos. Letting go of knowing means letting go of who you think you are, not to become no one, but to become unbound, to be the sky, not the weather, to stop narrowing your worth into roles and achievements, to stop needing to be someone, and in that space there is room for everything. This way of being doesn't retreat from the world, it engages more fully, but it doesn't bring the baggage of rigid knowing. It moves lightly, it adapts, it dances, it learns without fear and listens without agenda. It stops needing every conversation to conclude, every moment to be meaningful. It just shows up. You begin to meet others not as ideas, but as mysteries. And when you do that, judgment begins to fade. You don't need to categorize. You don't need to win. You don't need to change them. You simply meet them again and again in each breath. And this becomes love, without decoration, without definition. This don't know is not the same as confusion. Confusion is a fog. Not knowing is clarity without boundary. It's not lostness, it's openness. It trusts the unfolding of things. It says yes to now, even if now is unclear. Even in grief, not knowing is a balm. It doesn't argue with what's gone. It doesn't pretend to understand why loss hurts. It just stays. It places a hand on the wound and says nothing. And somehow, in that nothing, healing begins. Not because answers were found, but because presence was offered. There's a deep intelligence in this mind, but it cannot be quoted or taught. It moves through experience. It lives in quiet moments of choice. It lives in silence after a hard truth. It lives in the gaze you give a stranger when neither of you knows what to say. In many Zen teachings, the greatest realization is often followed by laughter, because the seeker realizes that everything they were searching for was always here, and that all their questions, while sincere, were never necessary to begin with. The answer wasn't hidden. It was never in the realm of answers. This isn't about giving up thought. It's about giving up bondage to thought. Letting the mind rest when it's done its work. Letting being lead. Letting quiet carry you. In that quiet, things become obvious without explanation. Joy returns, not because everything is solved, but because nothing needs to be solved. Connection deepens, not because people are figured out, but because they are felt. Eventually, even the question, "Who am I?" fades, not because it's answered, but because it's no longer needed. The self doesn't vanish. It becomes transparent. The need to define it dissolves. What's left is life, lived directly, and in that directness, there is rest. Not the kind that ends in sleep, but the kind that ends in peace. A rest so complete it needs no resolution. A wholeness so quiet it needs no defense. A freedom so simple it doesn't feel spiritual. It just feels real. This is the gift of don't know mind. Not a destination, but a doorway. Not an answer, but a return to the breath, to the heart, to now. And in that now, you are already home. When the need to define who you are dissolves into presence, something even more delicate begins to rise. The weight of the past no longer grips so tightly. The mind doesn't rewind as often, but even then, there's one more thread that quietly pulls in the background, a lingering belief that the past defines what you deserve. It doesn't arrive loudly. It hides inside self-doubt, inside guilt, inside those private whispers that say, "Maybe I ruined my chance." This is where karma is so often misunderstood. People hear the word and think punishment, consequences, judgment, a balance sheet of sins. But that's not what it means, not in the teachings that truly liberate. In Buddhist understanding, karma is momentum. That's all, not a moral court, not cosmic revenge. Karma means action, and action leaves ripples. What is felt today is not punishment. It's a wave from a stone once thrown, maybe by you, maybe by others, maybe by generations before. But the wave is not a verdict. It's simply a continuation. You are not the stone, you are the ocean, and the ocean is not broken because it holds waves. Karma is not personal in the way the mind imagines. It isn't designed to shame. It isn't a label. It's a system of unfolding, impersonal, fluid, dynamic. Just like the wind, it follows patterns, but not preferences. It moves not because someone deserves movement, but because something set it in motion. Yet, so often, the mind turns karma into a mirror for self-judgment. I must have done something wrong. This suffering is my fault. I made bad choices, so this is what I get. But this isn't clarity. It's cruelty disguised as responsibility, and it only deepens pain. Real responsibility begins when guilt is set down. Guilt looks backward. Responsibility moves forward. Karma is not about blame. It's about direction. It doesn't say, "You are bad." It says, "This is what's unfolding. Do you want to continue this way?" And in that question, everything opens. Because the present is not fixed. It is the exact pivot point where old momentum can be met with new insight. Karma doesn't ask for penance, it asks for presence. A presence that sees a pattern without becoming it. A presence that allows you to feel the echo without reinforcing it. In this light, even the worst mistake is not a prison. It is a doorway. It only becomes a sentence when tied to identity. I am this kind of person. I'll always be this way. But no karma defines you. It only describes a rhythm until you hear it clearly enough to change the song. When suffering repeats, it's not because you deserve it. It's because something hasn't yet been seen all the way through. The universe is not cruel, it's consistent. It replays what you avoid until you finally turn toward it. Not to hurt you, but to help you meet what was never met. You may not remember the exact moment the momentum started, and that's okay. Buddhism doesn't require memory. It requires mindfulness. Not to understand your past in detail, but to meet the present with a softness that breaks the chain. The teachings speak of seeds. Actions plant them. Some grow quickly. Some wait in the soil of your life for years. But the presence of a seed does not equal a curse, and its sprouting does not confirm your worth. It only confirms nature. Water the seeds you want. Stop feeding the ones you don't. Karma moves like weather, not like law. Sometimes storms arise because of conditions you didn't cause. Sometimes sunshine breaks through without explanation. Your job is not to take credit or blame. Your job is to walk with wisdom, umbrella in hand if needed, open-hearted either way. This view dissolves the shame that often follows us in silence, the thoughts we don't speak out loud, the regret buried beneath the smile, the inner tension that comes from believing we are broken, that we've already failed. Karma doesn't say you've failed. It says you're alive, and this is where your aliveness has landed. No teaching ever said the past can't be painful, but none of it requires you to hate yourself. Pain is valid, sorrow is real, but guilt is optional, especially the kind that leads to paralysis, especially the kind that prevents healing, especially the kind that whispers you're not worthy of peace. Buddhism invites you to shift your gaze from "what did I do wrong" to "what is needed now," from "am I being punished" to "what is this moment calling for?" It removes the drama from destiny and brings you back to cause and effect, without the poison of shame. This shift is not easy. The grooves of self-blame run deep, but with attention they fade, not overnight, but gently, with each breath that says, I don't need to carry that anymore, with each step that says, the past is not here. I am. When you stop seeing karma as a judgment, you stop fearing your own life. You stop avoiding the parts of you that still ache. You begin to listen to them, and in that listening, the past softens, the grip loosens, and what once felt like a curse becomes a teacher. This doesn't mean abandoning ethics. Karma reminds us that actions matter. Words shape the world. Intentions ripple. But these truths don't demand shame. They invite care. They whisper, be awake, not because you're being watched, but because you're part of something delicate. The most liberating insight is this: you can change direction without changing your past. You do not need to rewrite your history to create a new future. You only need to meet this moment without resistance, without the story of who you were, without the weight of who you think you should be. The ones who seem most at peace are rarely the ones with the smoothest past. They are the ones who stopped dragging it, who held it with tenderness, who let it become compost instead of a cage. The past cannot be undone, but its impact can be re-seen. Karma is not a life sentence. It's a flow. You are not the crimes of your youth. You are not the mistakes of last year. You are not even the habit you repeated yesterday. You are the awareness that sees all of it and chooses something gentler now. And this awareness, this clarity, is always accessible. No matter what you've done, no matter how long you've wandered, no matter how convinced you were that you had to earn your worth back, you never lost it. You only believed a story that wasn't true. Every time you stop and breathe deeply, you interrupt the chain. Every time you offer forgiveness instead of resentment, you loosen the pattern. Every time you choose silence instead of reaction, or action instead of fear, or love instead of hiding, you shift the current, even in the smallest ways, even with the subtlest gestures, a softer tone, a second thought, a hand extended. Karma turns not by force, but by presence. So let go of the belief that you are permanently stained. You are not the worst thing you've ever done. You are not even the most repeated thing you've done. You are the one who sees, who feels, who learns. You are the one who is still here. And if you are still here, then change is not only possible, it's happening. Forgiveness does not come from forgetting the past. It comes from refusing to be defined by it. It does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means knowing something happened and still opening your heart anyway. That's how karma heals, not by being paid off, but by being held differently. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that karma is not a prison. It is a mirror, a teacher, a stream you can step out of, a pattern you can bow to without continuing. The old patterns may whisper, but they cannot command. Not if you meet them with kindness, not if you no longer confuse them with who you are. So meet them, not with fists, not with fear, but with the strength of someone who no longer flinches at their own reflection. You do not need to be punished to be free. You do not need to be perfect to begin again. You do not need to earn stillness. It is already here, in this breath, waiting for you to notice. The past only has power if you carry it into now. Let it rest. Let it bless you with lessons, and then let it return to the soil. You are not your karma. You are not your past. You are this awareness, this possibility, this breath. And that is enough. Always. The idea that you must prove your worth by following a moral checklist has taken root in many corners of spiritual life. It whispers that you must climb toward goodness, purify yourself of every flaw, and earn some final approval. But from the view of deep Dharma, this is not what ethics are for. Sila, the foundation of Buddhist ethical conduct, is not about moral perfection. It is not about achieving holiness through discipline. It is about revealing what is already whole. After releasing the burden of self-judgment tied to karma, one begins to see that the path of Sila is not linear. It is not a staircase to some imagined enlightenment. It is the natural movement of wholeness when it is undistorted. The more one rests in awareness, the more one lives ethically, not because of obligation, but because of clarity. Not because it's written in a rule book, but because kindness feels closer to reality than cruelty. Sila arises like breath. It is not forced. It is not strained. It flows from the recognition that everything is interconnected, that to harm another is to cloud one's own awareness, that to speak falsely is to step away from the simplicity of what is. When wholeness is truly felt, the body, speech, and mind begin to align without coercion. This is why the idea of moral purity can become a subtle trap. It divides the world into the pure and impure, the worthy and unworthy, the enlightened and the flawed. But wholeness does not divide. It includes. It does not ask you to be sinless. It asks you to be sincere. It does not punish mistakes. It welcomes the humility that follows them. The 5 precepts, when viewed from the surface, can appear as commandments. But in truth, they are descriptions of freedom. When you refrain from harming, from stealing, from lying, from intoxication, and from harmful sexuality, you are not suppressing your nature, you are returning to it. These are not moral badges to be earned. They are reminders of how still the water becomes when nothing is thrown into it. The essence of Sila is not restraint, it is remembering. When you remember your interconnectedness, non-harming arises naturally. When you remember your dignity, truthfulness becomes effortless. When you remember your clarity, you do not need intoxication. It is not about trying harder. It is about forgetting less. This reframing is crucial. Because so many walk the spiritual path with a heavy heart, constantly checking themselves against a set of ideals, and in doing so, they subtly reinforce the very thing Buddhism seeks to dissolve, the illusion of a fixed self striving for perfection. But Sila, rightly understood, is not the domain of a self trying to be better. It is the fragrance of a mind that has touched its own nature. To walk the path of ethics from this place is to feel peace not as a reward, but as a companion. It is not about fearing mistakes. It is about learning how to respond when they happen. Because even when the mind forgets itself and acts out of delusion, there is something in you that knows the truth. And that knowing is what Sila bows to. The great teachers often described ethical conduct not as discipline, but as alignment, a tuning of the body-mind into resonance with what is. When that harmony is felt, one does not need to constantly calculate the right thing to do. One simply listens, one feels, one trusts the silence underneath impulse, one acts from stillness rather than tension. And in that way, Sila becomes art, it becomes poetry, it becomes the beauty of a life lived with attention, not in fear of punishment, but in love with clarity. It is not about suppressing desire. It is about understanding it deeply enough that you are no longer ruled by it. This understanding leads to compassion, because once it is seen that harmful behavior arises from forgetting, from fear, from delusion, there is less hatred toward those who act out. There is more space, more sorrow, yes, but also more tenderness. You see yourself in their confusion, and you also remember that confusion does not define anyone. This is why Sila is not offense. It is a mirror. It reflects your state of being, not your worth. It shows you where you are in relationship with the present moment. When ethics are broken, it is not a sign of failure. It is a signal that something has been lost in awareness. And that loss is not a condemnation. It is a call to return. That return is not dramatic. It does not require vows or guilt. It requires honesty. It requires the courage to see clearly what happened, why it happened, and what was forgotten in the process. And once seen, that clarity becomes your teacher, not as a voice of shame, but as a gentle hand pointing you home. This view also changes how we relate to others. Instead of labeling people as good or bad, we begin to see their behavior as degrees of remembering. When someone lies, it is not because they are evil, it is because they have lost touch with the safety of truth. When someone harms, it is not because they are beyond redemption, it is because they cannot yet see the full weight of their impact. When Sila is practiced in this spirit, it becomes spacious. It leaves room for complexity. It leaves room for growth. It does not tighten around you like armor. It opens around you like air. It holds the paradox that you can both act unskillfully and still be whole, that you can stumble and still be sincere, that you can forget and still be welcome. This is why ethics in Buddhism are never presented as a test to pass. They are presented as medicine. And every medicine works only if it is understood in the context of the illness. The illness here is not sin, it is separation. It is forgetting who and what you are. The cure is not obedience. It is remembering your original intimacy with all life. When this is seen, even repentance changes. It is no longer about proving you're sorry. It is about reconnecting with the part of you that never wanted to harm in the first place. It is about listening to what pain taught you, not punishing yourself for having caused it. It is about bowing not to shame, but to wisdom. This wisdom begins to reshape your world. Because as you live from a place of embodied ethics, your surroundings respond. Relationships deepen, conflicts soften. You stop needing to defend yourself because you are not building a self to protect. You stop needing to impress because you are not performing virtue. You are living clarity. Even in the monastic codes, where hundreds of rules are observed, the purpose is not rigidity, it is sensitivity. Each guideline is a way of reducing harm, not to look holy, not to control life, but to make space for awareness to shine through unclouded. In lay life, this same principle holds. The goal is not compliance. It is intimacy with the present moment, unmarred by regret. This intimacy is fragile and alive. It breathes through your speech, your actions, your thoughts. It is not found in grand gestures of goodness. It is found in how you greet a stranger, in how you speak when you're tired, in how you treat someone who cannot offer you anything in return. Sila, then, is not a destination. It is a rhythm. And you do not have to be perfect to feel it. You only have to be quiet enough to notice when it slips, and honest enough to return when it does. This honesty builds trust, not with others, but with yourself. Because when you live from Sila as wholeness, you begin to believe in your own capacity to choose well, and that belief is not arrogance, it is devotion. It is a devotion to life lived with eyes open, heart open, hands open. You no longer act kindly to be kind. You act kindly because it feels like alignment. You no longer avoid harm to be moral. You avoid harm because it feels like violence to your own nature. The rules dissolve. What remains is the deep intuition that this moment, this breath, this being is sacred, and so you treat it that way. This treatment becomes your teacher. Every moment becomes a test, not of your virtue, but of your presence. Can you stay true when it's easier to react? Can you stay soft when it's tempting to harden? Can you hold your values when no one is watching? These are not high standards. They are invitations, and each time you answer them sincerely, you remember you were never broken. You were only distracted. And from that remembering, a life of Sila emerges, not as a burden, but as beauty, not as effort, but as expression, not to become whole, but because you finally know you are. Letting go of needing to know opens a door few dare to walk through. And on the other side of that door stands the most misunderstood teaching in all of Buddhism. Not a call to erase yourself, but an invitation to see that what you called yourself was never confined to a name, a body, or a storyline. This teaching doesn't leave you empty. It leaves you free, not broken, not lost, not erased, but finally unharmed by the constant strain of trying to prove you exist. The doctrine of no self isn't a denial of being, it's the release of pretending to be something solid, separate, or permanent. At first, this feels like a loss, the loss of ground, the loss of identity, the loss of who you thought you were. But what's actually vanishing is not your essence. It's the scaffolding built around a misunderstanding. And once it falls, what remains isn't a void, but space. Space that was never missing, only hidden behind clinging. The teaching of Anatta, or not-self, isn't nihilism. It's not about saying there's no person here. It's about recognizing that what's here isn't something that can be held in concepts or locked into a shape. The ordinary mind keeps trying to carve out a fixed self from experience, something that can be labeled, held up, admired, or defended. But experience is flowing, momentary, uncontrollable. It rises, changes, passes, and the more one examines it with honesty, the more the center starts to dissolve. Thoughts don't happen by you. They just appear. Feelings rise without your permission. Memories play without being summoned. Even the sense of I that says, I'm thinking, is just another arising phenomenon. Part of the movie, not the projector. And yet, none of this means there's something wrong with you. In fact, it's only when the illusion of a separate, fixed self begins to fade that a deeper wholeness comes forward. A wholeness not built on roles, achievements, trauma, or narratives. A wholeness not born from control. It is the wholeness of life itself before it got sliced up into me and not me. To see this is not to stop existing, it's to stop resisting. The ego's idea of self is built on resistance, resisting impermanence, resisting uncertainty, resisting vulnerability. It's constantly patching holes, explaining itself, holding its breath. But what if none of that was necessary? What if the truth is that you were never the thing that needed fixing, defining, or protecting? There's a paradox here. The less you define yourself, the more fully you can be. Because now, being doesn't have to pass through a filter of approval. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to match a story. You can laugh without wondering if it fits your identity. You can cry without needing a reason. You can rest without guilt. This is not spiritual theory. This is the lived experience of millions who've sat in silence long enough to watch the self unravel, not into nothing, but into freedom. They didn't disappear. They became clear. Clear like a window, not a sculpture. No need to be admired, just open. And through that openness, compassion flows more easily. Because if there's no fixed self to defend, there's also no other to attack. So much of human conflict is born from the belief in a solid, separate self. I am this, and you are that. I'm right, and you're wrong. I've been hurt, and you're the cause. But when the self becomes more spacious, those walls soften. The grip loosens. There's room to breathe. Room to see that the other person's pain isn't separate from your own. That their confusion isn't a threat, but a mirror. Anatta shows that what you call you is a verb, not a noun. It's movement, not a monument. It's weather, not a statue. And when this is seen, not just believed but felt, the tension that once followed you everywhere starts to fall away. There's no longer a self-image to manage, no longer a performance to maintain. Just the unfolding of this moment, with no one needing to own it. This doesn't mean life becomes passive, quite the opposite. Action becomes more alive because it's no longer delayed by hesitation, by self-doubt, by mental rehearsal. When there's no fixed self to protect, there's also no fear of failure. You simply act, you speak, you respond. And that responsiveness is grounded not in identity, but in reality. The path of no self also transforms how you relate to memory. Instead of using the past to reinforce a fixed identity, I'm the one who was abandoned, I'm the one who succeeded, you start to see memory as passing clouds, not lies, but not absolute truth either. Just another appearance in the mind, rising and fading like everything else. This loosens the grip of trauma, not by erasing what happened, but by seeing it clearly without making it who you are. In this clarity, forgiveness becomes less about effort and more about understanding. You forgive not because the past was okay, but because you no longer need to carry a version of yourself that was frozen in it. You see that even your worst moments didn't define you. They only convinced you temporarily that you had to be defined. The more deeply you see through self, the more wonder returns. Not because you found better answers, but because the question, "Who am I?" becomes a kind of music rather than a demand. You start living the question instead of trying to trap it in a definition. And from this place, even silence feels full, Even pain feels held. There's an image in some Buddhist texts of the self as a flame that dances on a candle. It lights the room, but it has no shape you can hold. You can't grab it. You can't put it in a jar. It's alive, but it's not a thing. That's what you are. Alive, luminous, in motion, but not graspable. And the beauty is, you don't need to be, because nothing is missing. This is the wholeness that comes not from assembling perfect parts, but from dropping the need to hold yourself together. You are not a broken puzzle. You are the spaciousness in which all the pieces rise and fall. And when there's no longer a demand to be a finished product, a deeper peace emerges, a peace that holds all your changes, your messiness, your contradictions, not as errors, but as waves in an ocean that never stopped being whole. And this ocean doesn't need you to be perfect. It doesn't even need you to be consistent. It just needs you to stop trying to be a self you can finally accept. That struggle, the one that says, if I could just fix this, then I'd be enough, is based on the belief that there is an enduring self underneath it all that must be improved. But when that belief softens, what's left is presence, not improved, not perfected, just open. You still feel, you still fail, you still get tired, but now there's no one behind it all taking score. There's no judge hiding in your chest. There's just this unfolding experience, moment by moment, with no need to claim it. This is why some teachers say awakening is not a becoming, it's a vanishing, but not into nothingness, into freedom. The freedom of no longer needing to carry what was never yours to begin with. And this freedom doesn't remove love. It deepens it, because now you don't love others as a fixed self, loving another fixed self. You love them as the dance of life meeting itself. You hold space not because it's your role, but because it's your nature. You care without needing credit. You show up without needing to be seen. Because the one who needed applause, needed reassurance, needed confirmation, that one has dissolved, and what's left is breathtaking. It's not dramatic, it's not loud. It doesn't walk into a room and demand recognition. It just breathes, it just listens, it just lives. It eats when hungry, it sleeps when tired, it cries when hurting. And it does all this without a story to maintain. This is the paradox at the heart of Buddhism. The self never existed, and yet you are whole. Not because of what you possess, but because of what you no longer cling to. Wholeness is not the result of becoming. It is the absence of fragmentation. And fragmentation only exists when we believe we must hold everything together. Letting that go doesn't make you less human. It makes you real. So the invitation is not to find yourself. It's to stop pretending you ever lost yourself. There was never a self to lose. Only layers of habit, thought, and identification that wrapped around the mystery of presence. And now that they begin to fall, what's left isn't a void. It's everything. The path of no self is not cold. It is the warmest thing there is, because it removes the distance between you and life, between you and love, between you and peace. It does not require you to become anything new, only to stop believing in what never was. And when that belief fades, the struggle ends. And what begins is something softer than words can hold. Before any thought labels the moment, There is something quiet, a stillness so subtle most miss it. Yet it is here, underneath every reaction, every assumption, every grasping for meaning. It's not created by effort or belief. It's not the result of practice. It's already present, unshaped, untouched, and unmistakably whole. The deepest peace isn't something reached after 1,000 thoughts. It's in the space before the first one appears. After the paradox of no self softens the illusion of identity, what's revealed is not confusion, but a clarity too immediate to be described. The self was always slightly delayed, responding, rehearsing, measuring. But wholeness exists before that delay, before the inner commentary begins, before the old pattern reacts. This is the space between the match striking and the fire catching. Most never notice it. But that instant, before thought, is where the unconditioned lives. It's here mindfulness becomes more than technique. It becomes doorway. Not a tool to improve something, but a lens through which the silence behind the noise is seen. Mindfulness allows you to feel the breath without naming it, to hear a bird without calling it beautiful, to feel a hand without saying, mine. In this raw awareness, life shows up as it is, not as the mind filters it. The mind is fast. It wants to move quickly from sensation to explanation, from sound to story. But mindfulness slows perception just enough to catch the first moment of contact. And what's found there is pure. Before thought, there is no problem. Before thought, there is no lack. Before thought, nothing is broken. There's only the unfolding of reality, with no one in it to judge, correct, or resist. That first instant is not empty in the way people fear. It's not blankness. It's aliveness without boundary, peace without opposite, awareness not clinging to a thing. And from that stillness comes the capacity to respond rather than react. The gap is freedom. The one who notices the space can choose, but the one who skips over it remains a prisoner of habit. In truth, most reactions are rehearsals. They come from memory, conditioning, wounds. Someone speaks sharply and the nervous system fires before awareness arrives. But in the training of gentle observation, that space between stimulus and reaction grows. It becomes more visible, and in that moment of seeing, something radical becomes possible, choosing a different path. Not to please, not to escape, but to stay rooted in clarity. When mindfulness is deep enough, it's no longer about paying attention to this or that. It's about resting in the attention itself, noticing the noticing, returning again and again to the silent field where all thoughts arise and dissolve. The breath becomes a bridge, not because it's sacred, but because it brings the mind home. When thought returns, it's not rejected. It's simply seen, like a cloud drifting across a still sky. The sky doesn't fight the cloud. It doesn't identify with it. It just holds it, then lets it pass. That's how the gap before thought works. It doesn't stop thoughts. It unveils that they are not required for peace. Wholeness doesn't depend on having the right opinion, the best response, or the smartest perspective. It depends only on presence. And presence doesn't start with thought. It starts before it. This is why the greatest insights don't come from thinking harder. They come from stopping long enough to let the truth surface. Meditation isn't about becoming blank. It's about becoming aware of what was always there when the mental noise drops away. In that space, even pain feels different. It's not a mistake to be fixed. It's a wave of sensation moving through a wider stillness. The gap before thought is also the place where compassion starts. Not the performance of being nice, but the raw capacity to feel without collapsing into reaction. To hear someone's pain without needing to fix it. To feel your own sorrow without becoming it. That space gives room for others to be human. It gives room for yourself to soften. It gives room for life to unfold without being immediately judged. It's important to understand that this space is not something exotic. It's ordinary. Every person already knows it. They just forget to notice. It happens in the half-second before answering a question. In the pause between inhale and exhale, in the split second after waking up, but before remembering who they are. These moments of pure awareness flicker constantly throughout daily life, but they're often overlooked because the mind rushes in to label them. By learning to rest in the space before thought, one begins to live more honestly. Without pretending, without constantly evaluating, without spinning new identities. There's less need to impress, less need to perform, less need to explain. Because when you're present before thought, there's nothing missing, there's just being. And this being is not dull. It's vibrant, rich, quietly radiant. Not the glow of excitement, but the glow of completeness. No longer chasing meaning, but living meaningfully because presence itself is meaningful. In this stillness, even the smallest action, drinking water, folding clothes, becomes sacred. Not because of a belief, but because of the sheer intimacy with what is. This intimacy is what heals. Not by solving problems, but by ending the belief that something must be solved before peace is allowed. The present moment doesn't wait for you to improve. It welcomes you as you are, if only you pause long enough to see it. That pause is not laziness, it's depth. And depth reveals that life isn't happening to you, it's happening in you, as you. Thoughts will come. They always do. But when they're no longer the foundation of identity, they lose their power to disturb. They're seen like ripples on a pond, momentary, harmless. They don't define the water. They don't change its essence. And if the water stays still long enough, it reflects the sky. This is not philosophy. This is a practice, a return, a remembering. You don't have to live inside your reactions. You don't have to follow every storyline the mind offers. You don't have to argue with every emotion. You can notice, breathe, be. That is the whole teaching. The space before thought is where intuition lives. Not hunches, not guesses, but the deep knowing that doesn't arrive through analysis. It's where truth shows up wordlessly, where right action emerges without debate. It's not impulsive, it's grounded. Still, a tree growing from roots unseen. Some call this presence. Some call it awareness. Some don't name it at all, because to name it is already to step into thought. But it can be touched, known, lived. And when it's lived, fear begins to dissolve. Not because danger disappears, but because the one who lived in fear is no longer at the center. And when fear dissolves, love begins to move differently. It no longer grasps or demands. It becomes like sunlight, offered without condition. Because what's left is not a person trying to be loving. What's left is love being itself through you. You can practice this anywhere, in the space between footsteps, in the pause before opening a door, in the silence before speaking. You don't need a temple, you don't need a cushion, you need only willingness to pause, to meet life without armor, to breathe without fixing, to notice without naming. And in that meeting, wholeness reveals itself again. Not a distant goal, not a future version of yourself, but the unfiltered now. And that now is never missing. It's only overlooked, covered by habit, hidden by speed, but it waits patiently beneath every moment. To live from that space is not to escape the world. It's to move through it differently, rooted, soft, unshaken. Not because you figured it all out, but because you touched what never needed figuring out in the first place. What remains is peace, not because the mind stopped, but because it was no longer followed. Not because life became easy, but because you no longer believed difficulty made you incomplete. This is the wholeness in the instant before thought arises, and it's always here, waiting in silence, just before the next word. When even the boundary between waking and sleep dissolves, something unexpected appears, not confusion, but clarity. In the dream world, where laws of physics bend and forms shift at will, one truth remains untouched. The awareness observing it all is just as steady, just as bright. Tibetan dream yoga doesn't chase fantasy. It reveals how even in the wild fluidity of sleep, wholeness is never lost. This continuation begins with an understanding that consciousness does not turn off when the eyes close. It simply transitions, expressing itself through symbols, images, and movement shaped by memory and emotion. But beneath the dream scenery lies the same luminous presence that was available before thought during waking life. The dream is not the illusion. Believing the dreamer is separate from it. That's the illusion. Dream yoga begins where that confusion ends. Lucid awareness in dreams shows that mind and environment are not two. When one becomes aware that they're dreaming, the environment is seen as fluid and inseparable from the consciousness perceiving it. That realization is not philosophical, it's embodied. The dream transforms in real time, responding to the dreamer's clarity or confusion. This is where insight deepens. What the dreamer fears becomes visible. What the dreamer clings to becomes exposed. But more than that, the awareness watching all of it never flinches. Dream yoga offers a mirror. In waking life, the mind assumes that solidity equals truth. But in dreams, that assumption dissolves. Mountains fly, walls melt, identities change. And yet, in the middle of the shifting, there is something that doesn't move: awareness itself. That stable knowing is not bound by the body. It's not diminished by strangeness. And the more one rests in that clarity, the more one sees. This same awareness is present in every moment of daily life. But dream yoga isn't about controlling the dream. It's not about making fantasy more beautiful. It's about seeing through the dream's appearance to what gives it light. Whether the dream is peaceful or frightening, the goal is not to alter the story, but to recognize the nature of the storyteller. The dream becomes a teaching, not in what it says, but in how it points to the fact that everything seen is mind. And if all phenomena in the dream are mind, then fear becomes a teacher. In waking life, fear is often pushed away or acted out. In dreams, it's unavoidable. It becomes a monster, a storm, a fall through endless sky. But if the dreamer stays lucid, they can meet the fear without running. They can witness the shape of the fear shift. And in that meeting, something remarkable happens. Fear no longer dominates. It becomes a cloud in the sky of awareness. This same skill applies in waking life. Emotions feel like walls. But when one sees they're made of the same substance as thoughts and dreams, fleeting appearances, they lose their solidity. This is not detachment. It's intimacy without entanglement. Dream yoga trains the mind to see its own tricks, not with force, but with gentle clarity. It teaches that no experience, however intense, can eclipse the awareness in which it arises. In Tibetan teachings, sleep is not a break from practice. It is practice. The stages of falling asleep and dreaming are windows into the nature of mind. When the body sleeps, the coarse layers of identity fall away. The roles and stories dissolve. What remains is the subtle mind, untethered from form but still luminous. Training in dream yoga starts by carrying mindfulness into this realm. One technique is to reflect on the dreamlike nature of waking life during the day. By constantly questioning, "Am I dreaming?" the mind becomes conditioned to ask the same question in sleep. When it does, and the dream is recognized as a dream, lucidity arises. From there, the practitioner doesn't need to escape the dream. They enter it fully, with knowing. And with that knowing, all becomes workable. If one walks through a burning house in a dream while knowing it's a dream, the heat is still felt, but it doesn't burn. The fear still arises, but it's not overwhelming. This is the beginning of freedom. Lucid awareness offers choice, not the kind built on resistance or denial, but the kind grounded in direct seeing. And this carries into waking life. Challenges still come, but instead of being swept away by them, one learns to observe, to breathe, to remain open. Dream yoga also deepens the understanding of impermanence. In dreams, forms appear and vanish without warning. Identities come and go, emotions shift in seconds. There is no continuity except awareness. This reflects the reality of waking life. The self believed to be solid is not. It is a series of impressions, memories, and labels, none of which remain. But awareness remains, not as a possession, but as the space in which all things appear. Practicing this during sleep reveals that wholeness isn't tied to stability. It's tied to openness. The more one relaxes into the fluidity of experience, the less one needs things to stay a certain way. Peace arises not from control, but from surrender to the luminosity of what is. And when that surrender is total, even nightmares become teachers, because in that seeing, nothing is outside the light. Some teachings describe dreams as karma unfolding in subtle form, not punishment, but momentum. Dreams show the echoes of thoughts, intentions, fears, and hopes that have not yet surfaced in waking life. Meeting these echoes with presence allows for healing. a conversation with a loved one who passed, a confrontation with an inner critic. These moments can be profoundly transformative, not because they're real in the conventional sense, but because they reveal what's real in you. Wholeness in dream yoga is not a concept, it's a felt experience. The dream self may morph, the story may unravel, but the knowing that sees it all stays untouched. It's not affected by what the dream shows. This teaches something profound. If awareness remains whole in dreams, it must be whole always. What changes is the recognition, not the reality. Waking up in a dream is powerful, but waking up in this moment, right now, is no less profound. Dream yoga reminds us that lucidity is not a state reserved for sleep. It's a way of being, a way of seeing clearly that every form is fleeting and every experience is held in a space of perfect openness. To walk through waking life with the insight of dream yoga is to become intimate with impermanence and rooted in stillness. It means letting experience unfold without collapsing into identification. It means seeing joy and pain, success and failure, like shifting clouds in a sky that doesn't change. Even death is explored in dream yoga, not morbidly, but gently. Because if one can remain present as the dream ends, then one can train to remain present as this life ends. The teachings say that the dissolution of sleep mirrors the dissolution of death. The elements return to space, form disappears, but awareness does not. And knowing this brings peace, not just for the future, but for how one lives now. To rest in lucid awareness is to rest in your original face, the one not defined by form or name. It is to know that nothing needs to be added to complete you. Not a better story, not a cleaner dream, only recognition. The mirror need not be polished, it only needs to be seen. And when it's seen, everything becomes the path, the dream, the night, the fear, the silence, even the forgetting. Because the awareness noticing the forgetting is the same awareness that wakes up. It's not about perfection, it's about presence. Again and again, presence. This is the invitation of dream yoga. Not escape, not control, but intimacy with all that arises, asleep or awake. And from that intimacy grows a quiet confidence, not based on having the right answers, but on knowing you can meet whatever appears without losing yourself. The dream dissolves, the night ends, but what watched it all remains. And that watcher was never separate from life. It was never broken, never lost, only overlooked like moonlight behind the clouds, not needing to shine brighter, only needing to be seen. Finally, as we round up, a child once stared into a river and didn't ask if the water was clean enough to reflect her face. She just saw. Before memory, before identity, the mind simply rested. And then it learned to tense, to protect, to sort every experience into meaning. Chan calls us back to what was never lost, before there was something to lose. The moment after a dream fades, but before the next thought begins, that's where Chan points. Not to grasp what's in that space, but to stop adding anything to it. This teaching does not ask for improvement. It points instead to the mind as it is, unclouded by history or judgment. Original mind is not something you find after long labor. It's what's looking right now, before the story begins. Conditioning builds slowly. A face frowns, a voice corrects, a moment of pain gets labeled as who we are, and soon a self forms, a self that wants, that avoids, that fears being unseen. But Chan does not seek to destroy this self. It gently peels back the layers until what's underneath is seen clearly. Not as broken, not as incomplete, but as luminous without trying to shine. The original mind is not another state to reach. It is the state before reaching. In Chan, one is taught to drop preferences, not because they are evil, but because they color everything. To like this and hate that seems normal, but liking and hating turn life into a battlefield. Chan shows that peace lives in the space before the preference arises. That split second before judgment, there is freedom. This doesn't mean indifference. Chan doesn't numb the heart. It just removes the habit of naming everything as good or bad, better or worse. A flower opens, a leaf falls. Neither needs your opinion to be complete. The original mind sees things as they are, without dressing them in concepts. And in that seeing, there's no tension. The need to fix, improve, or define begins to dissolve. Chan practice, often silent and strict, may appear rigid, but its goal is softness. When the teacher says, "Show me your original face before your parents were born," they're not asking for logic. They're pointing to a truth deeper than birth and death, the you that was never caught in a role. That question breaks thought, because the mind that tries to answer cannot grasp what already is. This is not about wiping the slate clean. The slate never needed wiping. It was always empty. The words and lines written over it were never permanent. Chan doesn't fight the past. It stops giving it authority. Conditioning taught reactions, but not truth. Pain was learned, but awareness was always whole. That awareness is the original mind, not trapped, not stained, just hidden by noise. Returning to it means not adding guilt to action, not adding fear to silence, not adding identity to experience. When a bell rings, it is not labeled music or noise. It just rings. That's how the original mind hears life, not filtered, just present. And in this presence, there's no need to prepare, no need to fix. Everything becomes exactly what it is. The Chan tradition warns against getting attached to emptiness. Emptiness is not a void to fall into. It is the clarity that holds all things. When one sees through the stories, the preferences, the wounds, what's left isn't numbness. It's aliveness without struggle. A laughter that needs no joke, a peace that doesn't depend on silence. People often seek healing by returning to their childhood, trying to uncover what was lost. But Chan says it was never lost. The child's joy, her clarity, it's not a relic. It's the nature of mind itself. The world taught layers. Chan teaches how to stop building them, not by effort, but by attention. Look before thought names what it sees. Hear before the sound is measured. Breathe before the mind comments. This is practice, not climbing up, but sitting down. Not seeking, but stopping. In that stopping, something timeless shows itself. And it's not dramatic. It's so quiet that it's missed when one expects fireworks. But it's there, steady as breath, soft as sunlight before dawn. When the mind returns to this stillness, The body responds, muscles relax, the face softens. There's no need to defend against life, because life is not attacking. That was the illusion of conditioning. Chan removes the enemy by removing the war. Nothing to fight, nothing to prove. The original mind is not fragile. It's just been drowned out by shouting thoughts. In meditation, the Chan student may be told to sit with a koan, a paradox meant to stop thought in its tracks. What is the sound of one hand clapping? The question is not meant to be answered. It's meant to break the addiction to answering, because beneath the answer, the one listening is already at rest. The mistake is believing peace is something to earn, something that comes after enough practice. Chan says otherwise. The path is not linear. There is no future wholeness. There is only now, unfiltered. The mind before labeling was already whole. What disturbs that wholeness is the constant commentary. This is why silence in Chan is sacred, not because sound is bad, but because silence reveals what's underneath. The original mind doesn't reject sound, it hears it without story. A crow caws, a door slams, the heart beats. All of it arises in clarity. That clarity never chooses favorites, it just witnesses. And witnessing is enough. There's no need to hold or push away. Thoughts come and go. They are like dreams passing through the sky. The sky doesn't try to change the dream. It just remains open. That sky-like mind is your original nature. It doesn't need improving, it only needs to be seen. Even in pain, it is present. Even in joy, it is still. It doesn't grasp at the high or dread the low. It holds both like waves passing over still water. And when one rests in it, peace arises, not because life got easier, but because the struggle to control life ended. The great Chan masters often answered with silence, or a shout, or a gesture, because they knew the truth was not in words. It was in the awareness behind them. A student asks, "What is Buddha?" The master raises a finger, not as a symbol, just as what is. That pointing is enough. And you too are pointed back, not to some distant self, but to the breath you're holding, to the foot touching the floor, to the silence behind this thought. That is where original mind lives, not past, not future, right here, unmoved by time. You don't have to understand it. In fact, trying to understand it creates distance. Better to stop, to be quiet, to look directly. There's nothing missing. There never was, only a forgetting. And even that forgetting is held in the same awareness. No drama, no fireworks, just this, the sound of a bird in the distance, the cool air on your cheek, the noticing of thought before it becomes identity. That's the pathless path of Chan, returning not forward, but inward, to the simplicity that was never gone. In the end, there is no need to transcend life, no need to escape the ordinary. The ordinary is sacred when seen clearly. Washing a bowl, sweeping a floor, smiling without reason. The original mind makes these acts shine, not because they are special, but because nothing is left out. You are not here to become something better. You are here to see what you already are. Not the image, not the role, not the conditioning, but the clarity that watches all of it, gently, with no need to change a thing. That is your original face. That is the mind before preference, before hurt, before even the idea of a self. And it has been waiting, not impatiently, not quietly, but always, right where you are now. Even in the noise of the world, in the effort, the healing, the wondering, the waiting, you were never missing a piece. Every lesson, from the quiet of sunyata to the clarity of don't-know mind, wasn't about changing you. It was about unwrapping what never left. You were never broken, never late, never outside the circle of wholeness, not once. This journey wasn't a climb toward worth. It was a soft return, a loosening of the grip on self-improvement, and a gentle bow to the truth that even suffering carried the scent of your completeness. Whether it was the flicker of lucid awareness in a dream or the silence before thought appears, the teachings pointed not to a destination, but to a remembering. And if just one line tonight helped you feel less alone, if even one breath reminded you that you're already home within yourself, then let it echo. Leave a comment below. Share what stirred you. Your voice might be the next whisper that wakes someone else. If this brought you peace, clarity, or stillness, don't let it be the last time. Subscribe to the channel. Let these teachings walk with you, quietly, gently, night after night, as you fall asleep to the truth of who you already are, whole, complete, enough.